Hey, friends, welcome to another exciting episode of the Alive and Kicking podcast. I am so thrilled to welcome our guest today, Mr. Mark Certo. How are you doing today, Mark?
Very well, Jordan. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great. Let me give a quick introduction to the world, anyone who doesn't know Mark. Mark Certo is a musician, a recording engineer, and consciousness researcher renowned for his contributions to the exploration of human consciousness through sound technology specifically. His journey began with a profound interest in music's psychological, spiritual, and emotional effects, leading him to study meditation and its impact on the mind. In 1984, Mark relocated from New York City to Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains, where he established a recording studio and ventured into radio broadcasting. This period marked a significant shift in his career when, in 1987, he joined the Monroe Institute, an organization dedicated to the study of human consciousness, founded by the great legendary Robert Monroe. As a recording engineer at TMI, Mark collaborated closely with Monroe, developing sound-based technologies designed to facilitate altered states of consciousness. Following Robert Monroe's passing in 1995, Mark became the chief creator of the Institute's audio programs, further refining techniques such as binaural beats to induce specific brainwave patterns associated with various states of consciousness. His role at TMI allowed him to work alongside notable figures in consciousness research, including the amazing Dr. Edgar Mitchell, Dr. Charles Tuckert, and Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. In 2001, Mark departed from TMI to pursue independent studies in comparative religion and Jungian psychology. This exploration led to the creation of the Triad Mind, a meditation program designed to guide individuals through three levels of consciousness: the conscious, the subconscious, and the superconscious minds. The program utilizes carefully crafted audio recordings with sound patterns intended to lead listeners into deeply relaxed, focused, and expanded states of consciousness. Throughout his career, Mark has remained dedicated to empowering individuals in their pursuit of self-realization and self-actualization, integrating his extensive experience in music, meditation, and consciousness studies to develop tools that facilitate profound personal transformation. All right. Now that we got that out of the way, that's the official introduction of Mark Certo. Let me know anything that you would like to add there and introduce yourself to the world, Mark.
That told the whole story, basically, with regards to my interest in professional career. Thank you. Well done.
All right. I know it's kind of an awkward thing when you ask someone, say, "Hey, tell me about yourself." It's like, "Oh, well, when I was 4," so
Well, you're going to learn as much as you want to learn. Just ask the questions you want to know, and I'm happy to oblige.
yeah,
You don't want to
absolutely.
know about what happened when I was 4, do you? Because I barely remember. I'm six.
Sometimes the most profound things start then. That seems to be before we've lost our connection to
Yeah, for me, it was age 7 or
nice.
8.
Yeah,
Something occurred there where I just woke up
really.
for a short time and wondered who I was. And it was the
Hmm.
first time I ever became self-reflective that I
Wow.
could remember.
At
And
an
I
early
began
age,
to, yeah, it was triggered by a song on the radio, Beatles song.
by
And
sound.
yeah, do you want to hear this story?
I would love to.
So back in 1892, when I was 7 years old, I was a huge Mets fan, 1969, right? Mets were crazy. The
Okay.
World Series victory. And baseball was, if you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, it was going to be a baseball player. What kid doesn't want to be a baseball player when they're grown up, at least in my generation? So I'm running down the stairs, getting ready to go and play baseball with some friends of mine. And as I come down the stairs and turn the corner and run into the kitchen, and at the threshold between the living room where the stairwell was and where the kitchen was, my mom was doing dishes and she had the radio on. And I remember walking through that threshold and stopping. I mean, dead. Like, what am I hearing? It was weird. And I thought about it for a moment and couldn't quite make sense of what it was that had this effect on me. And I asked my mom, who's that on the radio? And she stopped what she was doing. She said, I think it's the Beatles. And at that moment, it was like I remembered something about myself and that baseball wasn't going to be what I was going to do with the rest of my life. It was to be a Beatle. whatever the hell a
Huh.
Beatle was. You know, I think they broke up that year or the year after, right? So they obviously got tired of waiting for me. But that was an important moment in self-reflective awareness for me because it felt like a memory. Like, oh yeah, that's who you are.
Huh.
And it was the first time that that ever happened. Another time when I was maybe a little bit older, I caught a glimpse of something in my eye as I was brushing my teeth, and the same feeling came upon me. Who's in there? It
Yeah.
wasn't a dissociative thing. I knew all the whole time that I was Mark, whatever Mark was at age 8, 9, 10, I was a little kid. Never really thought about the nature of self. But those were my earliest experiences in what I can only refer to as self reflective awareness, where you're actually paying attention to the self. And there was how shall I phrase this? An objectivity to it. Like I wasn't absolutely certain, but it was a work in progress. There was potential there.
Huh.
So now you know all about my early history with meditation and what sparked all this interest.
And it has to do with sound and music, which I think is fascinating. And it makes me
Yeah.
wonder if were you remembering something from the past, or I like to call them future memories, where you actually have a glimpse into the future, or maybe even possibly future Mark at some point had gone back and tagged that moment or did something in that moment that shifted your conscious awareness into a different direction. So depending on how you view time, is there an arrow? Does it only go linear? Or can you skip around like you would on, say, a record? And even though a record plays in one general direction, when you
Hmm.
allow it, you can pick up the needle and place it somewhere else. So I firmly believe in future memories as opposed to, say, precognition, that you're actually remembering an event from the future. And I've also done things like visions to past memories where you can actually relive a past memory and revise the ending, as one technique. So say you had a traumatic experience, you can kind of give it a different ending, and that will have an actual effect on current you and future you. So it makes me wonder if maybe at some point you went back and sort of guided young Mark in a particular direction. You helping you. You know.
I have no doubt.
Okay. I love this. Usually when I say stuff like that, people look at me like I have three heads. I say it to you, and you're like, "Well, yeah."
I've spent the past 30 years listening to bizarre stories that were considered, you know, fringe, unusual. I take them very seriously because I don't know, I'm an open-minded person for one. I don't believe I have all the answers to everything for two. I'm a curious person for three. And that has served me incredibly well. Not only do I get to know more about myself as I explore the questions or experiences that I've had that are anomalous experience, but I also learn something about the nature of relationship and what I'll call the greater self through interaction with another. I don't look at Jordan and I mean I can look at Jordan and I can see Jordan as an individual, an expression of self. I can also look at Jordan as another part of me. It's all a matter of open mindedness, willingness to connect in a deeper way.
Yeah.
If I stick with myself, uh, float in the sea of my own narcissism, if I look at others and listen to others with an open heart and an open mind, I'm in direct communication with something that is much larger than myself. And I know that only through my felt sense experience of what that means to be in the depth of that kind of relationship. So that's just the person I am. And perhaps that's why I've had the experiences I've had,
Yeah.
why I was led to certain places. I can't say for sure. I wish I could give you an absolute, but I'm not a guru, so I'm still
Well, you
in
know
this.
that it worked. This mindset worked and it served you well, and that's the proof is in the pudding. So, I think it's like it's an energetic thing. When you're putting up walls, you're going to prevent connections. You're going to prevent opportunities from coming in, and you've done the opposite. You've opened doors. Like you've allowed all these things to come in by having this open-mindedness, by looking at everything as connected. You don't put these walls and prevent these things from happening. So you're opening the floodgates in a way. And
Well,
obviously, I'm sure you have discernment when that happens, but you're allowing the things to come in.
and I don't want to present myself as not having any defense patterns. I mean, I grew up in New York City and my dad was a cop, right? And one of the first, he liked to say that one of the first words I ever taught you was the word bullshit, you know, and don't ever try to bullshit a bullshitter.
Yeah.
This is my dad talking to me, father son advice, right? And the world is full of stories which are not necessarily true. But when I hear such stories coming from people, my first line of thinking is not, what particular brand of bullshit is this? My first line of thinking is, I'm getting to know this person. Maybe they completely believe this story because it happened to them. Maybe they believe this story because they need to create some kind of psychic sense of self that includes this story, whether it's true or not. Maybe I don't know is the answer. But I
Hmm.
do know that through the information I'm receiving, I get to know who this person is. And if this person is truly a reflection of self, as I believe we're all connected, then there are aspects of myself that are perhaps telling me something from an objective point of view that I get to experience subjectively. And through self inquiry, can learn something not only about that person, but also myself. Where am I defensive? Where am I making up stories? Where am I, creating a self that is true or not true? Have I really gone into depth? So when we talk about like my experiences at age 7 or 8, right? I remember the experience like it was yesterday, and it happened 58 years ago, a long time. But I remember it because the felt sense experience was so strong. It was powerful. It was palpable. It was transformative, and it came and it went, right? But I never forgot it. And it set me off on a trajectory of this type of inquiry that I've spent my life doing unabashedly. I don't really care if it's perceived as weird. So when somebody tells me
Hmm.
a weird story that happens to them, I can relate. I've had weird experiences. I don't know what they mean,
Yeah.
but I do know that, and we were talking earlier about integration, that if I look at it with that type of eye, you know, of what I mean, my eye, my physical eye, and eh, learning something about the I that is present before me and learning something about the I that's present before you, we connect with a to a much larger I. That may sound mystical and strange, but it's kind of the way that I go through life. And I learn a lot about the nature of ego, the nature, the constructs, and the defense patterns, not only within myself, but in others. And I honor that because those patterns are built up through traumas and wounds and perceived traumas and wounds and just a need to get away from the void of being without an eye, you
Yeah.
know,
No, that's
which is
beautiful, and it makes you look at everything with judgment, because if you look at somebody as an extension of you, or at least a fractal of the same ultimate whole, then you look at everybody and you look at them as, okay, we're similar in so many ways. I mean, we might even be cut from the same cloth. So if this person's lying or deceiving or cheating or whatever it may be, why are they doing this? And have I ever done this in my life? And what led me to do this? And what can I learn from this experience? And how can I help this person? So instead of just ultimately and instantly judging the person, which so many people are so quick to do, take a moment and just really think about what's going on here and integrate it. And I think if more people did that instead of just immediately saying, you're full of it or you're lying or whatever, like really peel back the curtain a little bit and see why. And then, like I said, we're not perfect. Nobody is. And everyone has been there. I mean, the human has this amazing ability to go from, devil to angel through one lifetime and sometimes back and forth many times. We're very complex and this world's very complex. It's a training simulator for consciousness development at the end of the day. So these challenges and obstacles and all these things are important for our growth. So we can't sit here and pretend that we're perfect or we have it figured out or anything. As soon as you say that, the system's going to throw you something to knock you off your perch or to give you another challenge. Once you say, "Oh, I got it all figured out," the system will be like, "Okay, well, let's challenge you then. Let's give you some more to think about." So we'll never figure it out. We'll never have it all, figured out. So by looking at other people's problems as our problems, in a way that gives us something to work towards. Like, okay, maybe I did figure out some of my problems, but this person has problems. So how can I help them figure out their problems, or help them with their problems, or help them navigate, or share some of my wisdom, or whatever the case may be. So I love that about you and how you look at the world, and I think it's important for everyone to kind of take that perspective. So, I mean,
And it's also an expanded state of awareness. Because if you can do that in the moment, you are activating many parts of the sensorium through practice, right? You're not landing on a foundation of what is unknown. You're staying curious about what can be known. And that can actually act as we'll call it less than altruistic. I'm not trying to heal you, but I'm listening. I'm taking in what you're trying to do to me and using my sensorium to figure out what this dynamic is. Because in my worldview, everything is vibrational. So these subtle energetic response patterns that I get from interacting with people include incoming information and also stored information. Like, that's how people land on things. They get incoming information. They say it immediately goes to the memory banks of our life experience. And then we end up saying, this person's full of it. Yeah. And the reason I know that is because when I was 9, somebody tried something similar. It's called transference. Not a bad thing. It's just a thing. And the more you can learn to ride your wave of transference, the more self-aware you become and the more curious you become. Your sensation of or distrust of somebody may be 100% on. They may be trying to pull the wool over your eyes. I'm not that stupid. I want to know, why are you trying to pull the wool over my eyes?
right.
Or is my response of this person's trying to pull the wool over my eyes, is that something for me to be in observance of right now? Maybe they're being completely honest. So the Monroe Institute was a wonderful training ground for me because I've heard so many stories that are unbelievable. You know, I mean, we could talk about those forever,
Oh,
but
I can imagine the stories you have.
but the things that were considered conspiracy theories, like, MK Ultra and, aliens and remote viewing and psychics and out of body experiences, all these things back in the 80s and early 90s were considered, what kind of crap is that? By the general public. Now I have family members and friends who are watching, like Sean Ryan's podcast and Sean Ryan talking with Joe McMoneagle or Skip Atwater about the remote viewing program, and like, this stuff is real. Did you know about this? I've been talking about this for 30 years. Where were you?
Yeah.
They didn't understand. So yesterday's conspiracy theories or, nebulous rabbit holes that people go down trying to understand the nature of life become facts in,
Yeah.
everyday language later on, 30, 40, 50 years. So
Now you
I
can
don't
see
think
how
that's
far ahead of the curve you were, because like none of these concepts are new. Like I said, some of them are thousands of years old, but
mhm,
we weren't ready for it as a culture, as a civilization. We just weren't ready for it because the information was out there. The Monroe Institute's been around for decades. Robert Monroe's books were written what the 70s and 80s, between those three, and this information's been out there, but it just wasn't getting into the you're a Jungian, like the collective unconscious. It wasn't penetrating, getting that mass effect. For some reason, it still was staying on the fringes, even though it's been, repeatedly proven. I mean, remote viewing is beyond proven. There's so many things that y'all did at the institute that were repeatable, scientific experiments. So the data's there. The testimonials are there, the credibility is there. I mean, some of the people you worked with and you yourself are some of the most credible people you'll find. And you mentioned Joe McMoneagle. He actually taught me how to remote view at the Monroe
mhm.
Institute, and I spent all day with him. And he's incredible. You're not going to find a better person in general. So the quality of the data, the experiments, the people is all there. None of that can be questioned. So why did it take society so long to wrap their minds around this? Is it just because people are busy and they just discount it? Is it because you're sort of denying this because we are so materialistic and we just went through the most material, probably 50 years of human existence, and because these things a lot of have to do with the non-physical, is it just so hard for people to comprehend that there is more than your physical body and more than this physical world? What are your thoughts on why it took so long for this information to finally penetrate into the masses?
We've still got a way to go.
True.
Um,
But we're getting there
that's
quickly.
that's that's a large question for exploration. I want to be very clear. I'm not a Jungian psychoanalyst or anything like that. I just have a very mm, big affinity for the writings of Carl Jung
Gotcha.
because I understand that what he was talking about was integral to this thing we call the psyche. And he had anomalous experiences that were revealed in the Red Book, which was a diary of his that reads like the diary of somebody who's exploring altered states of consciousness. And he helped a lot with my understanding of how to integrate this work for self actualization. We can talk about that a little bit later. With regards to your question, well, you also made an assertion that the Monroe Institute has a lot of data that is irrefutable. I can tell you that we have more, we at the time when I was there from 88 to 2000, we had more questions than answers. We're, any serious consciousness researcher will always have more questions than answers. When I was interviewing um, the people who are engaged in consciousness research with the Expanding on Consciousness podcast, my favorite question to ask them, and I've asked all of them, for all of your experience and knowledge, and we're talking about people who've done serious research, clinical research on altered states of consciousness and consciousness anomalies, for all of your experience over the past 30, 40 years, whatever, all the books you've written, what is consciousness? And the wisest ones, the most honest brokers will always say the same thing. I have no idea. I have
Right.
no idea what I'm talking about. I mean, we just spent an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it was, and you're asserting all of this clinical data as being an absolute truth and leading towards an answer to what is consciousness. You would think they would know the answer. They don't. The people at the Monroe Institute don't. We have theories. We
What
have
makes that
experience.
Sorry to interrupt, but what
No
makes that
worries.
even more astounding is that we're starting to believe and understand, it seems, that consciousness is fundamental, that basically space-time, comes falls out of consciousness the same way a dream would fall out of your mind.
Right.
So thinking that consciousness is fundamental, that it is the underpinnings of everything, of all reality, all of the different realities. and not knowing what it is makes it even more astounding. Because we're sitting here saying this thing is what creates everything else. And then someone's like, okay, well, what is that thing? And then, like you said, if you're being honest, even the most, intelligent consciousness researcher would have to admit they don't truly know what it is. We can use metaphors and we can paint pictures that kind of describe it, like Tom Campbell, talks about the virtual reality system and source consciousness being more of like you know, almost like a computer program, and we're just the rendering agents of it. Robert Monroe talks about consciousness as being kind of from the emitter, the projection, that this was a holographic type of a universe, and that it was like the light that projected it, and maybe the light itself is conscious, and that therefore everything else is conscious because the light that builds our holographic reality is made of conscious light. So there's different metaphors and different ways to explain it. But then when you ask, okay, where does that light come from? What's on the other side of the emitter? Like if you ask Tom Campbell, what is the larger consciousness system? It falls apart. It's like it's unknowable, and that
There you
just
go.
adds to the mystery.
That's right. And pursuant to your question, why is it taking us so long? Maybe part of it's cultural. Maybe we're not asking the right questions. Maybe we don't want to be taken advantage of by the myriad charlatans who do have the answer and are all too willing to spoon feed it and create, a cult for their own aggrandizement and that sort of thing. I don't really have the answer, Jordan.
Yeah.
There are myriad reasons, but consciousness, as you very well and astutely put, not to sound like an AI who is giving you a platitude, but it's a very astute observation, is evolving, in my opinion. Consciousness has a line, a threshold of understanding. And the explorer comes to that line, and consciousness says, you got that figured out? Good.
Yeah.
I'll move over here so the journey can continue. What that implies regarding the nature of consciousness, to me anyway, is that it is evolving. That means that it may be fundamental, meaning that's in everything and everywhere, but it's not a static thing.
Hmm.
I'm a student of Kabbalah. And one of my favorite books was written by a rabbi by the name of David Cooper, and the title of the book is God is a Verb.
Yeah.
Not a static,
Yeah.
I am completely. That may be true, but it's also something that's evolving, also something that's learning, an interactive biofeedback loop that is working in tandem because God consciousness, whatever that is, whatever one wants to refer to as God, and I don't create God for anybody, is is and will be
Yeah.
according
We know,
to the Kabbalistic model of consciousness.
and
So,
that gives meaning to life if you think about it, because the way I look at life is much like how Tom Campbell does, that we're here as fingers of God. We're the ones, like God is God's source, or whatever you want to call it, is learning vicariously through us, through all of our experiences, interacting with each other and everything we go through in life and our challenges and overcoming obstacles and all the stuff that we do in life. We're feeding that information back up to source, and source learns, grows vicariously through all of us. And that gives absolute purpose to us and to life, and also connects us directly to source. I think it's the most beautiful and the most logical explanation for the universe and for life in general, and also for evil and for challenges and for adversity and all the things that we resent and we don't think we want or need. It gives us purpose. It makes us mandatory almost. And you can find so many different, esoteric and ancient religions and stuff that we're kind of going down that path. This isn't new ways of thinking. And so I really love, what you said, and looking at life that way. But what it does is, with modern day religions, they look at God as being omnipotent and all knowing. And when you tell them that no, God is evolving with us and needs us, and then they take offense to that for some reason. But I went to a symposium with Tom Campbell in Huntsville, Alabama, just a few months ago, and it was amazing. And he told a story about how he was talking to a religious scholar, and I forget exactly the the terms and the exact person, but he basically said that he thought that the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament was that God evolved. It is very fascinating to think about, right? Because the two books are couldn't be any more different, right? And no matter what you want to think is Elohim plural and who God is and all this kind of stuff, but if you just use that as a metaphor, that it almost seems like God evolved, that God matured, and went from dark and jealous to light and love through those two books. You see this evolution of what we call God, and whether that is ultimate source creator that exists in the absolute outside of the universe, or the God that created humans and maybe terraformed Earth, however you want to look at it. It still seems like there is an evolutionary process that goes on at all these different levels, at our personal individual level, at our societal level, at maybe even the lowercase gods that maybe created this physical avatar and set in motion this earth, and then even at the top echelon, the one outside of this entire simulator, who's using this as a way to evolve themselves. When you look at that and you see that the entire state of existence at every single level is a constant state of evolving, you know, I think that's amazing. And it gives purpose to everything that we do.
And brings a lot of mystery. As I said earlier, I don't create God for anybody. Yeah, people listen to me talk and they want to know, what does Mark think about X, Y, and Z? I prefer to leave a lot of things as a mystery. You need to find out for yourself what this is. What I can say without, giving away all of my thoughts about God or creating God for you by giving you a theory or an experience that you can resonate with and say, well, Mark Certo says so, it might be true. I don't know. Is that if you stay curious about it, you realize that God is part of the story of consciousness as consciousness has evolved in human beings. It's an important story or part of the story, and it may have the ultimate answer if you take the time to connect with whatever your belief is around or disbelief around God. Just go and explore it. It's part of you. Whether you
Yeah,
believe, you don't believe, how you believe, it doesn't matter. It's a part of you. It's a part of the self. Ask yourself how you got there. Ask
yeah,
yourself what it still means for you, what it can mean for you. Now you have a sophisticated theory of God, maybe even personal experiences. We talked about the future Mark talking to the younger Mark, right? If there was a future Mark who could collapse time space through quantum non locality and speak to that younger Mark and set him on a trajectory that would eventually create the future Mark as it existed, right? Because time is in some kind of weird loop. Why would God, is God evolving into itself through self knowledge? And does God need to, prompt little godlets in order to become itself? Or is it, as many theologians suggest, static? I am. Or do we need to tweak our understanding of what the words eheye, I am, mean? Eheye being the Hebrew for
hmm
the response that God gave to Moses. Most religions can relate to this notion of stillness and omnipotence and omnipresence of divinity. I think there's something within that that is part of the story of our understanding of ourselves that prompts us to move into that, to know, to be still and know that presence, to be open to the wisdom of the information that's everywhere. Some might call that psychic. I don't. I don't know what that means anymore. I'm sufficiently psychic, meaning that I tap into wisdom when I don't cloud it over with some veil of misunderstanding. That too is God to me, that information. Is it also a part of myself that is existing in the future, directing me towards where I need to go next? Is it a holy guardian angel? I don't know the answers to that, but I do know that all of these are archetypes of sorts that give us what we need if we're open and present to what is right here in front of us.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and you reminded me of like, so I researched one time, or I kind of went in a bunch of my own thought rabbit holes to try to figure out what thoughts are in general, because it's
Mhm.
such an interesting thought. What is a
Right.
thought? Where does it come from? Where did that thought just come from?
Hmm.
And Ishtok Bentov, gave me some good ideas, through his books of what a thought was, and I formulated this thought bubble concept where everybody has a bubble, and those are your thoughts, right? And they're your thoughts. Those are your thoughts. Most of them are based on personal experience, things that are in your perception field, things that are happening right now, right? Like, oh, I'm hot, I'm cold, I'm tired, I'm hungry, whatever. Those are just sensory thoughts. And then you have your thought bubbles for memories and things you need to do and things running through your mind, that kind of stuff. But so you have your own personal thought bubble. Those thoughts is just data. It can come down into your brain. Your brain basically it just amplifies it like an amp would amplify a sound signal and turn it into sound waves, and it amplifies that thought into or that data into a thought. Okay, so you have this thought bubble. Well, what's to stop in the non-physical something from putting thoughts into that thought bubble? And now a thought came in there. So people talk about where did this thought come from? Where did this epiphany, this aha moment? Where did I get this thought? It could even account for voices people hear or talking to God, this kind of stuff. If you look at it from a data point of view, just information, you can put information into that thought bubble. And so say a future you could put information into past you's thought bubble. And then that thought comes down in and then it's amplified by your brain and you had a thought. Where did that thought come from? So I look at that thought bubble as, that's your personal thought bubble, but say you're next to somebody, maybe my thought bubble overlaps with their thought bubble, and then maybe I can pick up some of their thoughts, and now I can sort of read their minds. Is that how telepathy works, nonverbal communication? Um, I don't know. These are just me thinking, but when you think about thoughts that way, then it becomes okay. The thoughts are mine, but they're not solely mine. The thought bubble is available for other things with access. I would hope there's some sort of level of access you have to grant. Maybe there's not. Who knows? To be able to put thoughts in your thought bubble, and then you can bring them down and amplify that thought. So those are just my thoughts on thoughts. What do you? Where do you think thoughts are?
Those are all good thoughts, is what I want to say. In the world of quantum field theory, they talk about that as qualia, emotional and intellectual thought packets, which
Hmm.
exist in a theoretical space called the Hilbert space. There were lots of theories, Jordan. The Kabbalists talked about that as the involution of information coming from Keter of Atzilut. The Buddha talked about it in terms of Maya, which is, all illusory until you get, and your purpose being to get to the nothingness of reality. Tom Campbell likes to talk about it as a controller of the video game, and you're an avatar expressing in the matrix. It doesn't matter how we talk about it. What's really interesting, or what names we give it, what's really interesting to me is why is that part of the story of consciousness? Once upon a time, if you happen to be, I don't know, living in the 1960s and 70s and you did a lot of LSD, you might have such thoughts. Where are my thoughts coming from? Oh my God, do I actually exist? I'm having a bad trip out. Now,
We've all been there, Mark.
right, but when you look at it, and historically, you can see that Plato and Pythagoras and ancient Kabbalists and ancient Hindu sages and Buddhist teachings, and I mean, these ideas have been with us forever. I want to know, why have these ideas been with us forever? And just as importantly, with the advent of the way information moves through us in the current era and the way information is curated for us, especially by artificial intelligence, will that be part of the story of consciousness 200 years from now? Or will we have achieved some form of hive mind mentality there where individuals are no longer free to choose to think about their thinking because it's all been implanted for them? Every bit of knowledge is implanted for you. You don't have
Mhm.
to think about such things. There's no need for evolution. We got it all figured out. I don't know, is the answer. But I like to keep the conversation alive and the curiosity alive through doing exactly what you're doing, thinking about your thinking. Where do these thoughts come from? And more importantly, and that's why I start meditation teaching with a very simple principle of just trying to clear the mind and not getting agitated when the thoughts come up. Just don't engage them,
Mhm.
observe them. I seem to be thinking about X as I quiet my mind. Oh well, let's
Yeah.
get quiet. Peace. And then the next thought emerges. Where do these thoughts come from? After you get beyond the curiosity, or after you get beyond the need to engage with that thinking, right? And start seeking more of the quiet and space that exists between one thought and the next thought. There's a little bit of space there. The next level of curiosity I like to encourage is, as you're sitting in that space, keep an eye out on where that spark of the next thought that emerges, where does it come from? It's like the Higgs uh, boson particle that pops in to the accelerator and goes away.
Mhm.
It's the same principle.
But it had to come from somewhere.
It comes from somewhere.
Trace it
It
back.
comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm not going to propose to know where it comes from because that would be another theory. And, we could talk about that in terms of how one works with that in the triad mind, the assumptions that could be made. But I just want to encourage your audience, just pay attention. Don't engage. Don't
Yeah.
engage with any of this information for 5 minutes a day and see where that leads you. Just observe. And
It's
you'll
so
find it
powerful.
addicting. You'll find it
Yeah.
addicting. You'll observe everything.
It is, and it is addicting, and it is important to reiterate what you just said. That's the most important thing is that when you are trying to meditate, people think they have to clear their mind of thoughts. And that's the thing people tell me all the time. Like, they're like, you don't understand the circus going on in my head. They're like, there's no way I can turn it off. They're like, I do understand. I have ADHD. I was a severe alcoholic. I had multiple organ failure. I was
Mm.
on my deathbed. I had a near-death experience that basically made me look in the mirror one day and look at the person in the mirror. And for the first time in my life, I said, what is this? Like, what am I? And it led me down this path of like, trying to find the three big questions, who are we, where are we, and why are we? That's what drives basically my daily behavior now. And in doing that, the thing that saved my life was you asked me earlier, like, because I was taking a sip of my coffee and you saw the Monroe Institute mug. You asked if I'd been there. Yes, I have. And in many ways, it saved my life. Not the Institute itself, not Bob himself, even though it had a huge role, but it gave me a tool It gave me a tool. Your help, because you developed these tools that I used. For someone like me with a racing mind and up against the wall with a clock ticking and needed to do some mega desperate healing and self work and everything, it allowed me to stop for the first time in my life and just stop and think and think deliberately. Not just think. We think all the time, but think deliberately and parse my thoughts and choose what I want to focus on and celebrate that time, that space in between the thoughts, like you talked about. I had tried everything else, nothing was working. And when I found HemiSync specifically, it it did so much of the heavy lifting for me, and it
Mm,
allowed me to get in the state that would have taken me so much discipline that I didn't have at that time. Now I've
mhm,
developed a very rigorous discipline when it comes to my meditation and my mindfulness. I didn't have that then. This was all
mhm,
foreign to me. And it allowed me to fast track. It allowed me just to skip all these steps. And in a way, I felt like I was cheating, but it didn't matter at the time. I had to do what I had to do. And it was a beautiful thing. And it really did. And I'm not just saying this, it saved my life in so many ways because all the traditional things weren't working. And this was non traditional. This was outside the box. Basically, long story short, my doctor told me I had to meditate because the medicines they were giving me for my blood pressure was insane. And the medicines weren't working. Nothing was working. Even stuff like diet and exercise and sauna, red light therapy, all the things, none of it was working. And she said, you have to meditate. And I was like, I don't even know what that means at the time. And anyways, through a bunch of my research, trying to find ways for someone like me, a hyperactive person with racing thoughts, to meditate, I discovered HemiSync. And when I did that, it changed everything. It for the first time, it was like hitting slow motion on life, And
mhm,
my life was in fast forward before, and for the first time, I was like, holy shit, like I can breathe, you know and it became addictive because then I was like, I want to be in the state all the time. And I remember somebody asked Tom Campbell one time, they said, how often do you meditate? And he's like, well, my life is meditation. He's like, I'm in a meditative state all the time. And if you've ever met him, which you have, he is it's like he's walking meditation all the time. And I was like, I want to be there. And I haven't got there yet, but it has it's become addictive in the sense that it works and the effects are so tangible and the benefits are so enormous that you want to keep doing it and you enjoy
mhm,
it. So something that used to scare the living crap out of me, sitting
mhm,
alone with my thoughts, are you kidding me? That's a nightmare. Now becomes one of my favorite parts of the day.
mhm,
in large part thanks to you and work at the institute because I had tried everything else and they weren't resonating. Not saying that they don't resonate for other people, but for me, they weren't resonating. But this this stuff worked and it resonated and it was a game changer. So you know, I don't even know where I began that tangent, but just from personal experience, like the act of meditation and being with your thoughts and knowing that you don't have to delete your memory bank and get rid of all your thoughts because that's practically impossible. You just choose deliberately which ones to engage with and which ones to let go, which ones just to pass by, like cars on a freeway. And when you develop that superpower, it changes everything because then it doesn't matter how many thoughts you have because you ultimately get to choose which one matters.
mhm.
Right.
Absolutely. And you get to be curious about a lot of things. So, first thing I want to say is I'm glad you're here to tell the tale. Well done.
Me too.
That was a great story. And I'm also pleased to hear that you learned how to work with vibration on that level. Yes, the recordings that I produced for Monroe and the technology that I helped to, hone and, perfect through the years I was there, it's all developed by Bob, and I stand on the shoulders of his giantness. So we can both give a vote of thanks and gratitude for the work that he did there. And the truth of the matter is that, I stand on the shoulders of a lot of giants. But ultimately, and I'll say this as a means of encouraging further exploration with you personally, is you are the magic. Your decision to become curious, your decision to change the vibrational nature of not only your thinking and your sensorium at large, all the way that I, I don't have ADHD, but I do know that it can be, I probably would be very uncomfortable with it. You know, my thoughts don't race.
It's a blessing
But
and a curse.
yeah, I like anything else, right? My vibration tends to move fairly slowly, but I've been meditating for 40 years, and you cannot meditate, learn to clear your thoughts, learn to observe your thoughts, learn to go down the rabbit hole of multidimensionality or the multidimensional nature of the self, have transcendent experiences, learn about the subject object split that's inherent in the psyche, engage with life in a different way, engage with yourself and your thinking in a different way without some form of change. And that change, in my opinion, is a shift in vibrational nature. We tend not to think about our thinking as vibration, but from a materialistic, neurological, scientific level, that's exactly what it is. It's electrical impulses. Electrical impulses are a vibration. That's all they are. The standard model of consciousness and how it emerges within the brain is great phrase, okay? Sensory input, a compendium of sensory input creating um, cortical stimulation and bouncing against memory. In other words, information coming in through our senses that we're aware of, sight, hearing, etc., creates an electrical pathway within the brain, energy, vibration, which bounces against a memory stored somewhere in the back of our heads and runs to the front of our brain and says, this plus this, meaning information coming in plus your memory equals this particular uh, meaning. This is
Yeah.
what this means. And there's truth in that. I mean, observable truth. You look at an infant and you hand something, like, look at this. They have no idea the complexity of this, right? This is a mala in to me. It has a lot of meaning. I use it for a lot of things. I couldn't explain that to an infant, but they see a shiny object and they go, "Wow, that's it means nothing to them." You give that same information to somebody who's never seen anything like this before, and they come up with the same look. But once they have an experience of what this is, or you can explain it verbally to them, the depth of the meaning of whatever this is to you, and they can relate to it in some way because their memory has some frame of reference to what you're talking about, then all of a sudden, if I show you this, you'll understand it, right? At least what it means for you. So that theory is correct. Sensory information incoming, creates cortical stimulation, bounces up against memory, and then goes back to the forebrain to create an analysis of what
Hmm.
that means. But that's not consciousness. That's just how consciousness operates in the brain.
Yeah.
My point of bringing that up is it's vibrational.
Hmm.
The same information that comes to you, this image that you see before you is a reflection of light on a bunch of vibrating atoms that have been comprised together to make up this personage that you see, that you can interact with. It's not real. It's not real. It's vibrating. There's more space in this body than there is actual matter. Same with all the matter that you see. We all know this, but
Yeah.
we walk about taking this information in without thinking about its true nature. And its true nature is vibrational. When consciousness that resides within you is prompted to do things like meditation, self examination, curiosity, it changes the way that we look at life and it changes our vibrational nature and the way that we interact with life. So kudos to you for changing the vibrational nature of Jordan through having to suffer a few life lessons that prompted you to where you are today and will probably continue to prompt you in unique ways as you go through the rest of your life. Same
Yeah,
thing, with hemisync, it's vibration. Everything is
yeah.
vibration. Music
I
is
mean,
vibration.
like you know better than anybody, we're more than our physical selves, and there's more than this physical world, but we are in physical avatars at this point. We are in a physical world. So it's like all the things like science and all the things you just talked about, that kind of technical jargon. It's true in a sense because we are just kind of making sense and describing this physical world that we're in. But it doesn't mean that's the whole picture. And I think that's kind of what you were getting at is like that's just part of the story. That's the part we can see and touch and hear. But there's a whole back end to the program, that we don't see, but it's there. And it's the most important because it probably accounts for 99% of what we call reality. This little sliver of us in this physical world talking to each other on the physical computer and this kind of stuff. This is such a small part of reality, but it's what we are experiencing right now. So we want to make sense of it. We want to experiment with it and get to know it and all that. But I think it's important to zoom out sometimes and realize, okay, that's just part of it. And that's what meditation really does. It's like at a certain point, when you're meditating, you forget you have a body. You forget where you are. You forget about time space because you've now shifted your point of awareness to wherever, to something else. And at a certain point, this kind of falls away. Same way when you're dreaming. When you're dreaming, you're not thinking about stresses of daily life and what you got to do tomorrow and all this kind of stuff. You're somewhere else. All those things still exist, but you're somewhere else. And I think it's so fascinating. Like meditation is just this quick, easy way to just kind of leave the world behind. And the more you do that, the more you realize how big everything else is and how kind of small this is. It's important. It's incredibly important, but it starts to feel like it's small. Like you just said, like most of our body is empty space. Most of the universe is empty space.
I tend to think of consciousness and say with, you know, a good deal of veracity as being multidimensional. That sounds so new agey and groovy and all that. No, 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 no. Consciousness is multidimensional. Consciousness on a personal level is a compendium of what we understand to be conscious and aware, present with what is happening right now, right? And we tend to think in our waking physical lives that this is reality, and because our consciousness is here. But it's not really the full story. Any psychologist will tell you that reactive responses to our subconscious programming or trauma or whatever it is that's in the content of our subconscious mind is also present, right? All that is Jordan, all that is Mark is a compendium of experience through time, from the time we were born to the time we're at right now. That's present. All of that subconscious content is present right here, right now. And we know that because of things like transference. Somebody says something to you, or you meet somebody for the very first time, like we're doing right now, and you like them, you don't like them. It's like an on or off, right? The person's great. Why? Because we can talk about all this stuff, right? Which is we're interested in. Maybe I also remind you of somebody that you've met in the past. Maybe there's a feeling that you get from me or that I get from you that is pleasant and based on a foundation that exists within a memory that is not necessarily accessible right now. Oh, that's right here. And Jung went so far as to say, and wait, there's more. We have a collective unconscious, which is part of the spirit of the world, the spiritus mundi, that is embodied in perhaps in archetypes that are millennia old. I mean, they're just part of our collective experience. And Jung, fortunately, was schooled enough in Eastern philosophy to understand, perhaps even Kabbalah, to understand that these archetypes are part of the story of consciousness in a collective form. We will embody these archetypes from time to time in our lives. And it is part of the life unfolding process, which makes it very impersonal, right? It's not part of Jordan's personal life story and consciousness and the development of him or Mark's. I don't want to keep naming you, Mark's, personal story of consciousness and the life that has been lived. There are also energies that are accessible to me and have been accessible to all of us for hundreds of thousands of years of development, depending on whose book you read and how long you believe humanity has been around. I call that superconscious, just to avoid any confusion between personal subconscious content and these collective memory or accessible wisdom of the ages. But all three of those contents of consciousness, the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, the superconscious mind, is active and alive within us as we go throughout our day.
Yeah.
It doesn't require that you sit for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour of quieting your mind to access this. That's a gateway into understanding that these content bubbles, so to speak, these vessels exist. I go into the hypnagogic state. I'm taking my conscious awareness into my subconscious content. Why do I know that? Because that's usually the pathway. We tend to think what happens is as you go into the hypnagogic state, what Bob called focus 10, is you're bringing conscious awareness to the point of sleep. All right, let's call this the threshold of sleep. As you're getting there, you start to see things, you start to experience things. Images bubble up. Where do you think those thoughts are coming from? My impression is they're coming from personal subconscious in symbolic form, very much like the dream state. After you continue to push that threshold further with the growth or the exploration of various focus levels like 12 and 15 to use Bob's cosmology, what's actually happening is your body is going more and more to sleep. I mean, like N3 or what they used to call stage 4 sleep, delta sleep, but your mind is still active and aware.
Mm-hmm.
That's pushing that threshold down. Your conscious awareness is moving and lands on this threshold. Sometimes you'll fall through and you'll fall asleep for a few minutes and you come back up. Oh, I was just sleeping. But I was also thinking about something. You're not sure if you were asleep or not asleep. And you keep pushing that threshold as you move through these focus levels, as Bob referred to them. And all of a sudden, that subconscious content dissolves. It's no longer personal. Now people start having transcendent experiences, impersonal experiences, connecting with the collective unconscious, which makes consciousness and the exploration of the hypnagogic state not only a gateway to subconscious content, but a springboard to superconscious content. And if you were to use the Vesica Pisces as a model, the two interlocking circles for somebody who doesn't know what that looks like, and you have what looks like a little eye, that was a wonderful glyph to depict what I'm talking about here, with the two circles overlapping to create a third, almost oval, looks like an
Yeah.
eye, The more you open up that eye, the more you push on the hypnagogic threshold, the more that eye opens. Now you're accessing information coming from the subconscious and the superconscious while being conscious, making life, as Tom Campbell put it, a potential meditation. All you need to do is kind of scan the band as you're getting the information in. You
Yeah.
understand where I'm going with that?
I do. Can I take a stab at kind of creating a metaphor, painting a picture of describing this in a way that my brain likes to think about things. And I borrow from Tom Campbell in his way also. Um, so say I'm playing a video game. I'm the guy outside the game. I'm playing a game, the character inside the game. So the character inside the game is like us in this physical world, right? We're inside the game. Outside of the game is still me, my higher self, my I there, my whatever you want to call it. That's still playing the game vicariously through my character in the game. But we're both, the characters. And then the superconscious could actually be like another character in the game that you can choose. Sometimes when you're playing a game, you're like, I'm going to choose the king or the ninja or whatever. You're choosing a different character and you're sort of being able to use its skill sets and its masteries in different areas and stuff to benefit you through certain parts of the game. And you shed that character and you go back to your main character. That's almost reminds me of like the superconscious, these archetypes that are there that we can sort of, I don't know, borrow things from or even kind of inhabit in certain ways to get us through certain parts of life. So if you
Mm-hmm.
look at life in the game, the virtual reality type of environment that Tom Campbell does such a great job of breaking things down, that's kind of how my brain goes to things just in the metaphorical sense. Um, it seems like we are the character inside the game, the one outside the game playing it. And also, when we do take over these other archetypes, those are just characters that we're able to temporarily use to get through certain obstacles and stuff in the game,
Mm-hmm.
kind
Well,
of.
there can even be a game controller behind the game controller behind the game controller.
Someone created the game.
Exactly. We don't know.
Yeah.
But the implication, again, is that there is a multidimensional nature to this thing that we call consciousness. It's not, if you look in the dictionary and look up the word consciousness, you're going to get a lot of information or synonyms that have to do with awareness,
Hmm.
meaning that the implication there being consciousness is either on or off. You're either aware or you're not aware.
Yeah.
It rarely speaks about what you're aware of and how to access this awareness because it's a hard problem to solve, right? I
Yeah.
mean, ex- researching consciousness in a clinic and looking for its origins is just, it's a hard problem to solve.
Because it seems almost
And
like a light ray. It can be in multiple places at one time. Like even your personal conscious, not just the overall conscious spectrum, but your individuated unit of consciousness, as Tom would call it, can be, you can have your consciousness beamed into multiple lives on planet Earth at one time. My wife does hypnotic regression therapy, and
mm,
she's a hypnotist. And we find this out all the time with people that they have other lives, at the same time. I think Bob even talked about having a sister in Russia, um, that or not a sister, another. There was a person in Russia that was a woman, right? You've probably heard that story. That was part of his same um, conscious spectrum, whatever you want to call it, at the same time, simultaneously. So then, to that point, like that kind of messes up that whole theory of it's just what you're aware of, because in that case is two different humans having two different earth life experiences from the same conscious stream, or I guess two slivers or two rays of the same conscious stream, however you want to define it, but you know what I mean. So, and they're not aware of each other, so you have to trace the root all the way back up to even come up with a sensible definition of consciousness, because if we're defining it from our limited earth life perspective, we're going to make it or self-centric and human-centric, but it's so much broader than that. It's basically impossible to define from inside of the reality that we're in. But what would you, not to put you on the spot, but if you had to define it, if somebody asked you, Mark, What is consciousness? What would you say? That's when smoke just
Something,
starts coming out of the ears.
something that can be explored and something that can be experienced, and beyond that needs no definition. And
Okay.
and its boundaries are limited only by your concepts around it.
Yeah.
Just like you, just like me. The only thing that makes Mark Mark and Jordan Jordan are the boundaries that we've constructed around this thing that we call Mark or Jordan or
Yeah.
anybody else or any other thing that you have ever met. Boundaries are important. Consciousness doesn't really have any boundaries. And when exploring altered states of consciousness and accessing these anomalous experiences in altered states and making connections through psychic functioning or having out of body or transcendent experiences, this pushes the boundaries, the limitations in the same way that I refer to that threshold in hypnagogic state between awareness and sleep, right? Or awaking awareness and sleep. You can push that like a late weightlifting. You know,
Yeah.
you start off at 5 pounds because your body can't lift 10 pounds. But before you know it, you're doing 20 reps with 10 pounds, and then you're into 25 pounds, and depending on how much you want to push the threshold. What happens? Your muscles get stronger and larger. Same with consciousness and exploring it. If you look at your life as being a product of how many hours you spend awake. That's the threat. Those are the limitations that you've imposed on consciousness. If you start to explore the hypnagogic state and realize you can be awake and aware while your body's going, then you know that consciousness is not quite as limited, conscious awareness is not quite as limited as you once did. If you shift your vibration rate to change the way that you perceive life and you take it in and you have more expanded states of consciousness with greater psychic awareness, you realize that the boundaries between Mark and Jordan or you and anything else are really kind of thin.
Yeah.
And I was watching Joe on Sean Ryan. And he said, not for the first time I've heard him say, nobody wants to be caught dead standing next to a psychic. Why? Because I don't want this guy probing into my brain and knowing all of my deep, dark secrets. Well, the truth is, there are no deep, dark secrets for somebody like Joe. But he isn't reading you all the time, right? No
Yeah.
psychic is. They have to kind of go through a process. That process is just as accessible to you as you've learned with studying him as it was to him.
But only if you believe it. I think like you know what I mean? Like, well, it's accessible to everybody whether you believe it or not, but you're probably not going to utilize it and actually activate it unless you believe. And so many people believe these things are not capable and not true. It usually it has to be demonstrated at a personal level, you know, and then you accept it and understand it in a sense.
I
You
have
know, it's like,
trouble with the word belief. Belief implies to me something that resonates, you information that I resonate with.
yeah,
You tell
better
me,
way.
hey, I had this experience and I believe it, right? I resonate. I like Jordan. I vibe with Jordan. So he tells me experience and I believe him what he's saying, right? Now this has, and again, Joe put it really well in that interview. It has more to do with the intention, attention, and expectation of outcome. The expectation of outcome might be perceived as belief. I believe that that there will be a positive outcome or that I will get the results I'm looking for. That may be a belief. But intention is a very different experience. When you intend to do something, you're an unshakable force. You're a laser beam. I'm laser focused on doing this. I will do this. How will I do that? By directing my attention to this task. And I know I'm going to get the results because that's the way the world works. Even if you fail to get the desired result or the expected results the first time, and usually people who try to, you know, create some kind of psi function end up succeeding first time out. You know, it's beginner's luck, so to speak. It
Yeah.
may also be something about the future self saying, hey, I'm going to help Jordan out here because he's going to get me to become me. I'm talking about the future Jordan.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know all of the mechanisms behind this, but I do know enough about it to know that if you try and if you practice and you will succeed at some point. What
Mm.
you do with that success is anybody's guess. Sometimes people, you know, they have an out of body experience, they wanted one, they have the experience and it wasn't what they expected quite the way that it scares the bejesus out of them and off they move. You know, it's like I never want to touch that again. Other people have that experience, wanted the experience, had it one time and can't seem to get back there for some reason. They spend the rest of their lives chasing after it.
Yeah.
Other people try and try and try and try and try and they can't get there for some reason. Are all of those products of limited belief structures? I don't know. Maybe. As I said, the only thresholds or barriers or um, boundaries that are placed on consciousness, in my opinion, are placed there by us.
Yeah.
It may well be that future us's also curate specific experiences because they're useful in our evolution
Mm.
and they know how much the psyche, as it has developed itself, because there is a self will there that created your own psyche, can handle, right? You know, understand what I mean by that? If for
Oh yeah.
some reason you could materialize an apple out of thin air, if they're interacting with the fields and doing whatever ritual you do,
Hmm.
that may be a desire for you, and you may put a lot of time into that, but there's a part of you that might be asking, if that actually happened for you, who would you tell?
Yeah. And
Yeah,
would it be
I,
productive or destructive to your trajectory?
exactly,
You know,
exactly. There's so many questions around it that I can't even fathom how
it
to ask
does
the right questions.
it does seem that like, that all of this whole reality is like a consciousness development simulator of sorts, but it's very precise. Like it seems chaotic, but it seems like it's being done in a carrot and stick type of a developmental manner, meaning that like we are kind of punished at times to like make us go backwards a little bit when we've gone too far too fast or something, but also
Mm,
encouraged to go forward in certain areas also when it's time to develop. And it seems like it is a kind of an orchestrated by something. Maybe it's a system itself, an organic system, or maybe there's something else. I don't know. It does seem like there is, like you said, sometimes where there are abilities. We know that there's abilities that everyone has, but why are they not activated? Well, maybe it's because they're sort of time locked. Like certain things get activated at certain, checkpoints of development. Who knows? But it does seem like if you can't do something, there's probably a reason. Because people ask me all the time. I try to leave my body and it doesn't happen. It's like, well, a, maybe you're trying too hard, or B, maybe it's not the right time. Maybe that experience is not what you need right now. Like just saying in a hypothetical, if somebody's beating something to death trying to do something and it's not happening, it doesn't mean that it's not capable at all. It just means maybe it that's not what you need right now in your consciousness development. Because I've seen that a lot with me. There's things that I can do now that I couldn't do before, even though I'm doing the same things, same,
Mm.
going through the same motions. And it's like, well, now I can better, I'm more emotionally and spiritually mature and stable enough to handle some of these things that I probably shouldn't have had access to at a certain point, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think that there are times where we are kind of guided to do things and also, restricted from doing things by something that's higher than us. And it might be us, just the higher form of us, sort of directing our character at particular times to do particular things because it has a wider perspective.
In the Triad Mind program, I present that conflicting dynamic as two aspects of the self that are fighting for who belongs on the throne of our inner being. It's a very poetic way of talking about the difference between the higher self and what some might call the familiar self. Some would call it the lower self. Just the familiar self. Both are there for your growth and protection. In the story of consciousness, I'll tell a little bit about this. In the story of consciousness, there's this dynamic between the higher self and the ego, right? The lower self. And most spiritual systems will talk about the ego as being the bad guy or the antagonist in the story of consciousness. Yeah. The one who fights the growth. Joseph Campbell talked about it in terms of the refusal of the call. Yeah.
Yep.
You hear the call, you understand that there's something greater, that part of your sense of adventure is ignited, but you say, I don't want to go through all that. That's a lot of work. I don't want to do that. The throne of one's inner being is a vacancy when you start exploring consciousness. It exists within us. It is the seat of motivation. It is the seat of personal power. It's the seat of the self. That which sits on the throne of our inner being ordinarily, I refer to as the guardian. It's not really the ego because it's only an aspect of the ego. The guardian's job is to make sure the familiar is maintained, that there's not too much growth too quickly. It wakes up a little bit when it has these experiences that are anomalous. It's enticed by synchronicity, by things like the potential of an out of body experience, like the phenomenon of seeing mm, similar or synchronistic number patterns in digital clocks like 11:11, 3:33, and this phenomenon that I'm talking
Hmm.
about, right? And we see these as, and Jung called it synchronicity. It's like, what is it's some kind of interlinking principle that reflects something to us. And for the purposes of his community, he called it, which was, an emerging science called psychology at the time, he called it meaningful coincidences, right? Things that happen that go, how in the hell does that happen, right? Life is full of them when you open up your sensorium and expand your awareness. Where do those come from? Certainly not the guardian. The guardian doesn't want to grow beyond Mark, right? I like Mark just fine. We've spent 64 years together. We're good.
Hmm.
We're almost at retirement now. We've kind of graduated this whole life thing.
Don't mess things up now.
Right, exactly. What are you going to do? Blow a cork? Next thing you know, you're going to go into some padded room somewhere or something like that. So it's familiar. It wants to maintain familiarity. Simultaneously, it's very curious about what's going on in the largest scheme of things because it knows that one day the throne of this inner being will not be occupied by it. It is temporary, making it an aspect of the ego that, is very curious about the nature of self and would like to have the answers.
Hmm.
The helpmate, the part of us that is accessing the superconscious all the time, whether we are aware of it or not, I call the intimate. That part of us that is looking for connection, intimate connection, deep connection with others, deep connection with our own soul, deep connection with the spirit that guides the soul through its evolution, deep connection with a part of us or something outside of us that we perceive as outside of us, which is part of the story of consciousness, the creator, the return to going home. You asked about Bob's wanting to go home and his experience of home in that email that you sent. All of these are part of the story of consciousness. They're ubiquitous. It's not like this is only something that I think about or Jordan thinks
Yeah.
about. Every human being that ever walked on the face of the planet thinks about these things, at least in small doses. And it's a desire within us to be intimately known and understood. It's a desire within us that want that we want to understand ourselves on that intimate level, let alone other things outside of ourselves. So you have these two forces working. That separation that you were referring to, that discriminate. How did you actually put it? You put it in terms of you know why do we sometimes wake up and other times go to sleep? Why is our growth seeming to be squelched by some outside force, and other times we blossom and bloom and we're in the flow? That you
It
put it
seems to be
in terms
managed
of
in a way.
yeah, right. You put it in terms of a punitive type of action, though. It's just like
Stick
sometimes
and carrot.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you guide with the carrot and you hit with the stick, depending on if you're trying to make the person go forward or backward.
I think it has more to do with the desire with vibration. Again, what do I resonate with? Do am I resonating with the fear that the guardian is provoking within me, that fear of change? And does that need to be a constant? Those are the two questions I would ask, because if I go to sit consciously, my conscious understanding of self, my awareness goes into the throne of my inner being, the guardian cannot be there. It's like matter and antimatter, right? I'm occupying the throne when I'm there. If if I have a transcendent experience and I connect with the intimate, the higher self, we'll call it, and I vibrate with that, the guardian may feel threatened by that vibration because it knows change is coming, but the guardian isn't the bad guy,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to tell your ego, we're going to kill you so that we can, or an
Yeah.
aspect of your ego, we're going to kill you so that we can be our true essence. No, you're
Yeah.
here. You have lived a life. You are here for a purpose.
Your ego has a mission. It's doing something, and sometimes it's at odds with other parts of you, but your job is to play like a coach and get everyone on the same page and understand everyone's playing a very important role. And when you
Right,
communicate that way, then you build this like, unity, everybody, there's a cohesion. But yeah, I
right.
hate the term, kill your ego kind of thing, because like your ego keeps you alive in a lot of ways. Like your ego's job is just to survive in this physical existence. It knows other things exist, but it has blinders on. It can't think about those things in a
The
way.
ego is a construct.
Yeah.
You made it. You made it what it is today. It can be a nice ego. It could be a real asshole. I don't know what, all the aspects of your ego. I'm talking about the essential qualities of this thing that we're calling a self. The guardian is an aspect of an ego. You might call it a super ego, meaning that it basically keeps, because the part of you that's exploring these questions about, what created myself and what subconscious belief systems do I adhere to, what are necessary, what are unnecessary, and you start doing all this, what my brother calls navel gazing, where you're just going into the depth of self. Once you start doing that and you eliminate what is no longer necessary, the guardian can accept that, but it doesn't want too much change too quickly because it creates a psychic disruption. It doesn't want too many conscious, paranormal, unusual, anomalous experiences or too much depth of connection, too much intimacy, because it creates a psychic disruption, meaning I have to expand myself. I have to grow. I have to make changes. On one level, the guardian can understand and accept change, but ultimately it wants to do so in small incremental steps that are
Hmm.
comfortable, right? When you have a full-blown Kundalini transformation, out of body experience, whatever type of transcendent experience that introduces you to the boundarylessness of consciousness, the guardian doesn't know what to do with that. And it fragments. It's got new information now that it has to integrate. That's why I'm so big on integration. That's why I'm so, that's why I tell people to tread lightly on the pathway towards transcendence. Don't
Yeah.
try to kill the ego. Don't be chasing transcendence. Mother ayahuasca is not the answer
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned because it blows holes in the psychic field. Too
Well, there's a
much
thin line
too soon.
between psychosis and enlightenment. I mean, it can go either way quickly, and that's a real thing. You have to be
It
very
is a
careful.
real thing.
Yeah.
It is a real thing. And that's why I teach the triad mind over the course of 6 months as opposed to 6 days. The
Yeah.
gateway or all the other programs have that, they build momentum. You not only build momentum between the dynamics of consciousness as it exists on the various levels, and you're pushing. It's like an intense training camp going to gateway, right? You
Yeah.
don't
It's
really
exhausting.
know
I mean,
that. Yeah, you don't
it's
really
a
know
lot.
that. You don't really know that because you figure, well, I'm going to sleep, 4 or 5 times a day. How strenuous is that? You're
Oh,
not
it's
really going to
intense.
sleep. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
intense.
My
And it's
first
not
day
only,
there I mean, it was beautiful. The entire thing was beautiful. But my first day, I had one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, and one of my first, meditations or whatever you want, exercises, and it was it was wild. I mean, I got it out of the way early, but but yeah, it's intense. It's a lot, you know.
mind
It-
if I ask you a question around that? I
yeah.
won't be the interviewer
No,
here.
I don't. Yeah, I'm an open book.
So I don't need the details if you don't want to divulge them. Have you discerned whether or not the terrifying experience had to do with personal subconscious content?
So I've thought a lot about this. So I'll tell you what happened because the only reason I'm an open book. So I even like went on my TikTok as soon as like every time I did one of these, I did like kind of a video uh, diary sort of thing just to get it off my
Yeah,
chest. And I had so many people say, "Oh my God, I've had similar experiences." So that's why I like to share this stuff. It
right.
helps people to know that they're not weird and not different. These are all very normal things.
They are.
So when I before. This doesn't happen anymore. So what I figured out is like basically like my perception blows up like a balloon, and as it expands, my starting point expands with it to where
Mm-hmm.
it's like a checkpoint in a game. So I can now
Mm-hmm.
begin after that terrible experience. I don't have to relive it anymore because now my bubble is expanded and I can place my starting point. My perception can go anywhere in that bubble. This is the way I visualize it. So
Right.
I used to have these very intense um, pictures of people's faces. So whenever I would
Mm-hmm.
go into my meditation, and I found out that this is pretty normal. And I mean,
It
so
is.
so vivid where I could tell you how many freckles were on somebody's face. I could tell you their eye
Mm-hmm.
color. I mean, the most vivid, high definition image, but real life, moving and talking to me. They're always talking to me, but I can't hear the words coming out of their mouth.
Right.
And it would be different people, and it was so visceral and it was wild. So it was either the first or the second exercise at the Monroe Institute on day one, and I went to a deep, state, and I started seeing faces, and that's normal. And one would come, and another would come, and another would come, and then it was just like I don't even know, millions. I'd have to say millions of faces, and it was just face after face after face, and I was going through them, and I could feel them. I could take on their energy. And it was just I heard the sounds and the like this, and it felt hellish in a way just because the energy was was dark in a way, and it was so intense, and it was overwhelming, and like it was, and it kept going, and I wanted to snap out of it because you always have full control to stop and take the headphones off and whatever, but something was telling me keep going, keep going, keep going, and I pushed through and I pushed through, and it seemed like hours, but it was probably only minutes, who knows, maybe seconds, I don't freaking know at that point.
Right.
Time's weird when you're in there, but it's like it felt very significant, and it felt like I was moving through millions and millions of people experiencing all their consciousnesses at the same time, and then all of a sudden I was past it, and it was like phew, and it was just blackness, and 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 it was very, very intense, and that took basically the whole time. Each one of these sessions is maybe 45 minutes or something like that, and that was the entire thing, was just moving through these spaces, and it was dark, and there was like a red tint to it, and it had this like hellish kind of a feel to it,
Mm-hmm.
but nothing was hurting me. And then
Mm-hmm.
after that, I never dealt with it again, and I never saw another face again. Like now,
Mm-hmm.
whenever I drop into meditation, when I'm doing hemisync, when I'm doing self hypnosis, anything I'm doing, no more faces. And it's
Right.
almost like I passed that level, and
Mm-hmm.
now, it was wild. It was really, really wild. So it wasn't scary. It was just a lot at one time, and it was right out of the gates. And I was just like, oh my God, you know. But it felt significant. Like it just had a feel to it that was something I needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So where that came from, I don't know. I've tried to analyze it, but so many things happened that week. Oh my God, like everyone there, Alan, Paul, everyone said that week with us was we had more paranormal activity that week than they had ever seen. I can't vouch for you and back in your day, but they were like, we don't know what's going on. And we ran the full gamut, the full spectrum of paranormal activity, and it was it was a crazy week. So that almost kind of got like forgotten about. But when I came home, I tried to reflect on the whole thing. What the hell was that? Like, where did that come from? And I don't have a definitive answer, but it did feel important, therapeutic, and I haven't had to repeat it since.
Well, I'm not an analyst, but I would say I'm not an analyst, but I'm going to play one right now. Um, I'm much more curious about two things. Not that your experience is, as you said, quite common. I'm curious as to why that experience needed to happen. I'm curious as to why you described that experience initially to me as the most terrifying experience you've ever had, only to say that at the end of the experience, the result was, well, there's more. First of all, you you described it as hellish, but not really hellish. You never got
I can
hurt.
see how if somebody went there or experienced that they would describe it as being in
Sure.
hell. You know,
But
I
you
don't
described it
believe in
as hell.
hell, but I could easily see how it could be construed in that way for sure.
Right. I understand. Believe me, I've had very similar experiences.
Mhm.
And there was a part of you that said, keep going, keep going, keep going. You're okay. You're okay. You're okay. And
Yeah,
you got to it and right into the void.
yeah.
Since that time, You've never had the same experience again.
Not
Prior
even
to that,
close.
I imagine you had very similar experiences because people in meditation, when they're first starting out, and a lot of times when they're moving into the hypnagogic state en route to sleep, see faces.
Yeah.
And my mom sees them all the time. She goes, "Who are those people?" I've never seen them before. Where do they come from? I said, "Just be curious." I'm not going to tell you. I
Yeah.
think I know, but I'm not going to tell you. Be curious. So the dynamic of what we were talking about prior to between the guardian and the intimate applies here. Can you see how?
Well, I mean, I can definitely see how I was being guided through it. I mean, at no point did I even crack an eye open, and I had full control to do whatever I wanted, but I didn't. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't even like. I was just like, I don't know, and that felt like it was something beyond like my waking consciousness would have been more in defense mode and probably would have stopped, but it felt like I was being not forced, but definitely encouraged,
Prompted.
strongly prompted to
Right.
finish the activity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And even though it felt hellish, or you just find yourself as somebody who doesn't believe in hell, so it wasn't real belief system of, oh my God, I'm entering hell and I was wrong the whole time.
Yeah.
I'm going through hell. Oh, help me. No, you said it feel, felt hellish. It felt
It wasn't a happy thing.
terrifying. Yeah, it felt
Yeah.
terrifying. And
The,
yet,
the people there didn't feel they
right.
felt like it almost was like they were in hell and I was passing through in a weird way.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
As terrifying as a roadside rest stop while you're driving down the highway of life, right?
Yeah.
It's really not that terrifying when you get to look at it, unless, of course, you have a belief that if you stop at a roadside rest stop on the highway of life, that you'll probably get murdered because somebody got murdered, right? We're talking about the power of belief system. I'm
Yeah.
curious about that because you don't really have a belief in hell, yet there is a sort of hellish connection that you can make having to do with terror and fear. That's the guardian.
Yeah.
I don't want to grow that quickly. And when you hit the void of nothingness, mind if I ask you what your experience was then?
Well, in that particular exercise, that basically took me to the end or so. I don't think I spent very much time there. Um, I had a very profound. I heard you say one time something about the dispassionate deity, right? Something along
Mm-hmm.
those lines.
Right.
In that, so I have another story if you don't mind that takes me to the void. So we went in one
Not
of the
all afternoon.
exercises. So cool. So in one of the exercises we went to the higher self, for
Mm-hmm.
lack of better words. And I forget which day and what focus we're in, but we were supposed to formulate a question and ask it, to our higher self. And when I met my higher self, it was not what I expected. Reading Robert Monroe's books, I remember when he's there with the eye there. It's so loving and warm, and let me show you all the threads of all of our bonded eye theirs, and they all reached out with glowing, loving hands. And we love you, Bob. Good luck out there. And I was like, yay, let's do this. I need some of
Mm-hmm.
this now. Well, when I saw this was my experience. I went to the void, pure blackness,
Mm-hmm.
and say you're looking out into space. You know how everything, like say a galaxy, looks like nothing. It looks like a pea, even though it's a freaking galaxy, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it had that scale where the space I'm looking at was that big, galactic, and this face appears, but it's like a wireframe, kind of like 1980s style, computer animation. So just the outlines of this gigantic stoic face, and it was like a blue white light, and this giant face in space from the bottom of my perception to the top, filling the entire space, and,
Mm-hmm.
100 galaxies tall,
Mm-hmm.
staring at me. And when I asked my question, it yelled at me. It snapped at me. It said, basically that in a nutshell, it said zoom out. So I asked a question. It said zoom out, and this power thundering voice So I asked the question, same question again. I could tell that irritated it. Zoom out. And I was like, okay. So I was like, huh. Obviously, it's telling me I'm thinking too small. So then I kind of formulated on the spot, like another question. And it said, zoom out real loud, shook everything. And then it said, there's not enough time for small steps, I think is the exact wording. I wrote it down in my journal, but there's not enough time for small steps, something like that. And then it goes poof and disappeared. That was it. I had like maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds with this just powerful entity, whatever it
Mm.
was. And it was very, I don't want to say like cold and uncaring, just it seemed frustrated with me.
Mm.
And I get that. But it definitely wasn't the warm and loving thing. So I don't know if it's like, okay, it knew it needed to break out that, personality type at that time to get, through to me. I don't know. Like I said, my wife does past life regression, and part of that she'll take people to their higher self. And I've listened to recording, and the person's tone changes. It usually gets more um, very serious, kind of, and a lot of just very cut and dry, like no humor, no, just like boom, this is what you need to do, and everything changes when they go to the higher self. So it was a very unique experience, and it was it really it had an impact on me because I left that room that day, that check you, and we went back to the debrief, and I was like, I need to get my shit in gear. Like I need to do some stuff. Like it really did kind of give me a kick in the butt, and I think that was the point of it. But
I
when you said dispassionate deity, that reminded me of my higher self.
understanding,
Yeah.
understandable. Yes, I don't perceive that part of myself as being all that emotionally invested in my comfort.
Like a drill sergeant.
I wouldn't, that's not my experience of it. And the guardian can take on that persona, um, but usually is a different means of keeping you limited. There is a notion of a spiritual superego
Hmm.
that, all right, so the superego is the overarching or archetypal energy that maintains the familiar and doesn't allow growth. And that superego is constructed um, or personified by, say, an authority figure in your life that has had an effect on you, like dad who is constantly looking at you, going, "Straighten up and fly right," that sort of thing.
Hmm.
You're not living up to your potential, whatever it is. That becomes part of your belief system about the self. Now, I'm not projecting what your dad was like or that the image that you ran across was a representation of your father, but it is
There's no one in my life that this would be um, represented,
connected to.
connected to.
Is there any authority construct or symbol that has a familiarity or resonance to that type of behavior in the
My
past?
my internal voice, like really, honestly,
There
I
you
mean,
go. There
like
you
I'm
go.
I'm by far my dad's been out of my life for a very long time. My mom died. I don't have a lot of like I'm pretty isolated as a person.
Mhm.
And but I have a very strong internal voice and I have a very
Mhm.
good connection with myself. Like I talk to myself all the time. Like
Mhm.
like I'm my best friend kind of. I'm my
Mhm.
teammate. I have an amazing wife. But like I spend a lot of time by myself and I'm fine with that. Like I enjoy myself. But I feel like there's another me inside of me and that felt like that deity or whatever.
There you go. Yeah.
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 But it had a
Uh,
chance to really like interface with me face to face, and that it
mm.
took that chance to to basically just say, "Hey, this is what you need to do."
Well, the message was quite clear.
It was,
Zoom out.
yeah,
Zoom out. I think you understand what that means, right?
Yeah, basically, it was telling me think bigger. Like the things I was asking it were they were things that were pressing at the time, but they weren't significant on like grander scale, obviously. And so I couldn't even tell you what they are anymore. But it definitely made me like it made me think of things differently. Now I look at things on a much bigger scale. Like I now I extrapolate down into the future. Like, okay, you know, I created this thing where like I created my future me, and then I turned it into like an assistant that I run all my decisions through to say, okay, would future me do this? And what I'm trying to do is like kind of transform into future me by basically doing the things that future me would advise me to do.
Hmm.
And I came up with that strategy after this session because I was trying to think of, okay, what does zoom out mean? How do I think bigger? And so it had a great impact, like but it was not what I was expecting. So I definitely didn't like subconsciously project that because it's not at all what I was expecting. Um, and when I tell people that story, a lot of people take offense. They're like, "Oh, my higher self is so loving and all that," and you know, I'm I'm not taking away from anybody, but that was just not my experience. And whether that was even my higher self, who knows? Like, I don't know what I specifically encountered, but it seemed to be specific. It was purposeful. It wasn't random.
It was purposeful. It looked you square in the face and said, zoom out.
Yeah, there was no denying
Now,
it.
yeah, and your perspective of it was very zoomed in, right? It was very larger than life type of figure,
Hmm.
right? Did I hear
Yeah.
your story correctly? I mean,
Oh yeah.
here's it, and here's you.
Yeah. Oh, I felt
An
an
ant,
atom, an
right?
ant,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Uh-huh.
in the presence of this thing. It was as overpowering as you can imagine. Like it was if the first, thing I described was more like hellish, this was like God, like what I would picture.
Sure.
But it felt more personal. It didn't feel like God. It felt like I was talking to me. It's just I was on its level instead of like here I am in this physical avatar. So when my internal voice or my higher self, it's interfacing with me through me. So we're on my grounds here. This is my
Mhm.
world. It felt like I was in its world. Like I was wherever I was. It felt like I wasn't here. I was on its level, so I felt
Mm-hmm.
insignificant. Probably
Right.
like how it's like this little voice in my head, and it feels
Mm-hmm.
insignificant. It was like now I have the chance. Like now you're in my world.
Mm-hmm.
Not like in a vindictive way, just like in a, almost like a brotherly, kind of a competitive, almost kind of a way.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I love you and zoom out.
Yeah, it was doing it it had a good
Right.
intention. Like it was a
Right.
positive intention. It just
Hmm.
without the emotion, without the humor that I would address it with. But that's stripped away because it's not in a human avatar. It doesn't need those things.
So I'm sure there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who would be willing to give you all kinds of data on what that was. I'm not one of them. I'm going to encourage you to remain curious, but more importantly, try to integrate that message
Yep.
into your daily life.
Yep.
Whenever you are confronted, and I'm talking about the two experiences, the passage of all of that, what you referred to initially as one of the most terrifying experiences of your life, which ended up not really being a big deal in the end result, right? Because you don't really believe in hell. And do you believe in God?
I do. I do. I believe in a creator. Like I've been able to basically cobble all these things together over the last 5 years of just intense like research and come up with my own sort of theory, but like framework of how this stuff works. And I wanted to actually run it by you because I think you could have some great insight in this. But I call it soul sync in the sense
Hmm.
that the way I look at it is, so our consciousness is non-physical and it like streams into these physical avatars to have this physical experience because there's things you can do in this physical world you can't do outside of it. I can run through a field, I can eat chocolate, I can go swimming, I can do these things that you can think about or you can run virtual simulations or whatever, but you can't really feel it unless you have all the five senses we have. You have the emotion, you have the finite, intense nature of this world, and all these things. It creates this experience that you just can't have anywhere else. And I think that's the point of these. I know you talked to Robert Temple, and I do believe that 99.9% of the universe is non-physical plasma, but we do have physical places. You know, what Tom Campbell would say, there's a rule set that governs this area and makes it behave and act in a certain way. And I think that this world is like I call it a simulator as opposed to a simulation, because I relate it to like a pilot using a flight simulator to become a better pilot. So anyways, our consciousness streams into these physical avatars to have this physical experience and send that data back up, and then our consciousness grows and learns and evolves through these physical experiences. But since this is a physical world, this physical body, depending on when you're born, where you're born, your belief systems, your upbringing, your environment, all these things, it's going to have sort of a life of its own. It is a sentient, almost like a sentient machine by itself. So say you remove the consciousness from it, I think it could still seek shelter and find food and forge, relationships to survive. It has a survival instinct, right? And so that's the physical avatar. And then we stream our consciousness into it, and we're like roommates sharing this physical avatar for the purpose of this physical experience. But we need to get along. We have to be on the same page, because if your consciousness realizes that you're sharing a vessel with another sentience, that the vessel itself has its own, if you study like human design or any of these concepts that will show you that depending on when you're born, where you're born, these types of things, you're going to be built with certain skill sets and personality traits and behaviorisms and that kind of stuff. So getting to know that and analyzing that and saying, okay, here's what my physical avatar is, here's what it needs, wants, desires, and then here's my consciousness, here's what it needs, wants, desires. It comes into life with a to-do list and this, that, and the other, and they're sharing space, they're roommates. Well, knowing that, I think, helps me a lot, because then I talk to my body, I talk to all these different parts as like a coach with a team, trying to get everyone on the same page, talking to everybody and keeping the morale up, as opposed to a lot of people I talk to feel like almost like prisoners are in their own body. They, like, if you have a roommate you don't like and you come home and you're like, oh, this guy sucks, and you don't even want to be in your house anymore. I think people feel like that in their own bodies because there's like almost like two things sharing that space. And when you synchronize that, you get them on the same page by doing audits of each and figuring out who each of them is and what they want and need. And you can bring all that together, then you can use this avatar in this more cohesive way, as instead of fighting with each other, instead of like being at odds. So I run that through my brain as I'm dealing with my own different pieces of my psyche, because this is a very complicated game here. But being able to break it down in those two ways, knowing that my body is one thing and my consciousness is another, and it's just entered into this, but understanding that has helped me a lot, just breaking it down that way. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because I know that's not a traditional way of looking at things, but it's how I explain mixing the non-physical with the physical world.
So
And I know
there's
that
not
that was a
really a
lot.
question. There's not really a question in there. You want to know, do I believe that there's room for integration between what, body consciousness and your consciousness?
That's kind of the way I see it, is that not so much that the body has a consciousness, but that it has a sentience, that it's made in a way to where regardless of if your consciousness is in it or not, it can still survive, because that seems to be the key instinct, the survival, period, because without that, nothing else really matters. But even if it doesn't survive, your consciousness still exists and it still survives in the non-physical. But whenever they're both together, it seems like it's like this fusion of two things. Like it's a fusion of your consciousness into this body, but the body itself is, you can treat it as a sovereign entity, like a being of its own that we're using, for lack of a better word. So kind of like, I hate to minimize it this way, but like renting a car. You're renting a car. Every car has a different personality, has different, things it can do, capabilities, this kind of stuff. And think about how
Yeah.
cars are getting more autonomous and cars are getting more intelligent. You can almost look at the human body as like that. It's a rental car for a consciousness.
Well, you seem to have a resonance with Tom Campbell's analogy of the avatar and consciousness residing outside the body as an explanation for the mystery of existence. Is that correct?
It seems it made sense with me for sure. Tom Campbell's teachings
Hmm. I
definitely
think Tom's
resonated. Um,
brilliant.
there's things I
I
don't
love Tom.
resonate with, so I'm not going to say I just subscribe, across the board, but he definitely, there's so many things that resonate with me, so many. And
Mhm.
I see that as there is this physical world, and that we're just kind of streamed into it the same way, radio signal streams into to a
I
from radio.
understand. Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I understand the premise,
yeah,
and I'm not sure that that's the answer for me.
yeah,
I see consciousness as fundamental. I see consciousness as omnipresence. Everything is consciousness. So this body is consciousness. My mind is part of consciousness.
hmm,
The access to higher wisdom is consciousness.
yeah,
There is no real separation. I and and I've thought about this, and Tom and I talked about it for like, I don't know, 4.5, 5 hours on the podcast that I did for Monroe, because he made two assertions. He makes the assertion that consciousness is fundamental and that free will exists, and then proceeds to talk about life in the virtual simulation as being the result of what is created by an intelligence that lives outside the body and is manipulating it through a joystick, right?
yeah,
And then when I said to him, well, that implies there's no free will. You're a puppet on a string held by a marionette. It's just you're making it a digital puppet.
yeah,
No, because the avatar in the video game has the ability to make free will within the parameters established that are called a decision space.
hmm,
And I'm sitting there thinking, who created the parameters of the decision space?
yeah.
Is
See,
it
actually, I
is
have
it
a
the controller? You
yeah,
know, I don't fully understand where he's saying. My bias is that consciousness is fundamental, meaning it's everywhere.
hmm,
My personal understanding of consciousness is limited through my experience, which continually unfolds all the time. My consciousness, defined as awareness, expands through effort. I make these choices to meditate. I make these choices to question the content of my meditation. I don't feel victimized. I feel completely free to go to sleep and ignore the whole kit and caboodle if I want.
yeah,
Nothing's forcing me, you know. I'm not
yeah,
getting a dictate to zoom in or zoom out, Yet there's an aspect of myself, which Bob would had referred to as the total self, what Jung had referred to as the total self, what I referred to as the total self, that is prompting my evolutionary expansion and my desire. Sometimes the child in me felt as if I was being punished and motivated through some higher form of self that was prompting me to do something like zoom out or lose weight or quit smoking or whatever it is, the
hmm,
directive, you know. I don't see it like that anymore. Maybe my experience has changed. My relationship to it has changed. I'm not sure. But it's all a part of me and it's all consciousness. And me and consciousness are one thing. And the source of consciousness is also part of consciousness. So the implication there is, best way for me to illustrate it is with circles, concentric circles from a drop in still water, all expanding outward and it all points back inward. There's only one thing that dropped into the water
yeah,
that, right? That we'll call that the source of the ripple.
yeah.
but the water itself existed as well. Otherwise, the drop would fall through empty space and continue to drop, right? There'd
Yeah.
be no ripple, there'd be no vibration. There had to be something, a protagonist, antagonist type of relationship, a subject, an object to relate to in order for it to expand. So I gave you that very picturesque image. And now all of your listeners, if they're still paying attention to this conversation, because we've been going on for now for quite a while now,
Oh, I'm sure they
is
are.
now thinking is now thinking vibrationally,
Yeah.
right? That's what the ripples are, the impact, the way we perceive these vibrations, the information, the forms of consciousness coming to us, whether we're in physical uh, presence, consciousness, waking consciousness, we'll call that for lack of a better word, or in an altered state of consciousness where the conscious mind or ego selves is being brought into a new experience of self. The way we perceive and interpret that, because the conscious mind is attached to our memory, right? It's all personal, your conscious mind.
Hmm.
Jordan's still Jordan in an altered state of consciousness, but he's a greater Jordan. Mark is the same. When we encounter these beings, it's incumbent upon us to learn and to be curious about the nature of that information. What is that information telling us? Earlier, I did the description of, conscious mind hitting the threshold of sleep and the subconscious content bubbling up. Well, consciously, and that's why I asked you these questions, you don't really believe in hell, right? It's a no thing for you.
I think
You
that
can
it's
you can
it's
equate to
created.
hellish, right? You
Yeah.
can equate to what might be a hellish experience,
There
but
probably
that
is a human
information,
created hell somewhere that people have created in the spirit world. Maybe out
I
of,
don't see why not.
yeah, I'm sure there is. I mean,
Do
people.
you have it? Do you have any resonance with it whatsoever?
No, no, I just think that there probably is a place that would be considered hell, but it's not like there objectively, like it's there for a purpose. It was probably created because we have this power of creation, especially when you're not in the physical. And you know, so but I don't think it's there as like the creator didn't put it there for us. I think we probably put it there if it does exist.
Bob would have agreed with you.
Yeah.
He thought and you'll go through that in Lifeline, is that Focus 25 is a belief system territory created by a human.
Yeah.
That's basically what it is. And that may be true. It may be equally true that human beings came into contact with hell through near death experiences in the year, oh, I don't know, 22,000 BC for the very first time and came back and, was resuscitated by some magical process and told the experience of near death experience of, seeing faces and writhing bodies and Dante's version. And hell is a construct that does exist in the imagination and perhaps in another dimension of human experience. I can't deny that hell exists any more than I can deny that God exists. If it's been there in the story of consciousness forever.
Yeah.
When we make contact with such things, however, I like to encourage the people that I talk to and work with in Triad Mind to be very curious about, is there something about the symbolic nature of the imagery or sensation, because it's not always visuals, that has a ring of truth to a potential belief that upon which you are anchored, or a ring of resonance with an experience that you did have. That's why I refer to consciousness as being both personal and impersonal. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what Tom is drawing at. But the language that he uses to talk about it I think confuses me because of my bias to believe that it's all consciousness. I firmly understand consciousness is fundamental. I don't, I can't possibly explain why I know that, but when I first heard quantum, I can't even remember what quantum theorists first presented that to me. I was like, of course it is.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
Of course, in the same way that, I knew I was going to be a musician.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is look behind me to know that that's obviously happened. It was a knowing. This is a knowing. That information that extended to you from the experiences you had are designed for your personal growth, in my belief. How you do that, who directed it, who directs it still, and what ramifications it has on your psyche, I cannot begin to project. If I did, I'd be presenting myself as an all-knowing guru, and I'm not here to bullshit you or anybody else. What I'm here for is to try to help you to become curious about that experience and ask yourself, what is this for? And
Yeah.
if you can take that experience and ask what it's for and come up with understandings from a conscious mind logical perspective, bring it into your meditations. I had this experience. Shout it out to no one or everyone or everything that's out there. I had this experience. Can anyone explain to me what this is about? What was this for? And then just sit in the void of not knowing for a while until one day. Now, I can't answer that in Tom's model with the video game controller. I just can't. Because it implies that there's no free will that would even enable me to come up with the suggestion or for you to be able to do that, let alone for you to implement it. Because that would be controlled by the video game controller. You know? I don't
Yeah.
get it. So I love Tom. I love his model. I don't understand it because of my bias, which is consciousness is fundamental and free will exists. I know that to be true, but that's not because I don't exist. I most certainly exist. I'm right here talking to you. This is not a
Yeah.
product of your imagination, right? There are
Well, we
things
we
that I
can't be
don't know.
positive about that, but
Oh, I can be positive. So I was thinking on our break about how best to answer Jordan's question. And the initial question that you asked me by email came to mind, which was, let's talk about Bob Monroe's experience of going home. I come from a lineage and an understanding based on my passion for Jungian psychology to think that everything is interconnected. So, how does that initial question that you asked me pertain to this question that you're asking now? Because you brought up Bob again, second time about the going home experience. I see, and your personal experience at the gateway, I see the beginning trails of exploring altered states of consciousness as being a reflection of the personal self and the desires of what I refer to as the guardian to understand things about the nature of self and the nature of existence due to its knowledge that the self is not really in existence at all. You made a very accurate, again, with the platitudes, right? The AI platitudes. You made an a very astute observation
What
about.
are you buttering me up for here?
I'm not. I'm,
Just
I'm
kidding.
trying to. Yeah, right. I'm trying to express to you and to your listening audience that when you get involved in the exploration of altered states of consciousness and the exploration of the multidimensional nature of self through using altered states or in whatever form to get there as a gateway, that most of the experiences that we have on the beginning parts of that journey, and believe me, it's a long ass journey, right? You're not going to get enlightened in a week, in a year, or a month. I shouldn't say that. Maybe you will. I don't want to limit your thinking. But my sense is that most of the things that we encounter in such states is a reflection of self that needs to be integrated in a new way in order for the guardian to be able to continue the journey without fear. Because the self, which is the guardian, will go through changes. So, taking your experience as opposed to the frustration was the emotion that you felt. Why are all these other people experiencing fuzzy unicorns and love and light and all that stuff, and you're not? You're having this hellish experience only to be confronted by a huge, gigantic Wizard of Oz type of being that tells you to zoom out. Is a possible It's a reflection of the self, which may be predicated on a desire to break free of fear, limitation, boundaries that were imposed by yourself, the guardian, or conversely, a desire, as in the case of Bob, to go back home. Bob's vision of home was very reflective of a fundamental truth in the story of consciousness. Bob spent years going out of his body, and it never occurred to him consciously that he could go home. One day he's having a conversation with an aspect of his self, which he came to call an inspec, an intelligent species. Bob loved acronyms. Who, during the conversation, said, "Oh, yeah, you can go home anytime you like." And Bob was like ecstatic.
Let's
This is
go.
great. Let's go. So he goes, and he finds himself in, I don't know, what I'll call the Elysian fields. He's lying in the field, and it's a picturesque, beautiful day, and the clouds are in, just beautiful cloud patterns passing by, and this gorgeous music. And Bob loved music, and he understood the power of it, was playing, and he was just basking in this love, right? Until he realized that it was a repetitive pattern of music and repetitive cloud patterns. And he didn't say this in his book, but when we were talking about it, he said, when I realized that it was just unlimited perfection on an unlimited loop, he said, "Oh shit." And he realized why, because Bob never used profanity. So when he did, it was in my presence anyway. He said, "Oh shit." And then he realized why he had come to the earth life existence to begin with, to get away from perfection, to be challenged in some way. Same thing that Tom Campbell talks about, same thing that a lot of mystics talk about, that the earth life school is somehow a means of activating a striving to know more about the nature of self and the truth of self. Well, that prompts a lot of questions for me. Did that did that experience teach Bob a fundamental truth about life as it exists for all human beings, or a fundamental truth about Bob and his desires to understand certain things? Bob was a curious explorer. He was always asking questions. I'm going to guess that the latter applied. Now, was that a transcendent experience? Most would equate that with, those kind of loving experience with as a transcendent experience, a unity experience. He felt totally connected to love and the source and that sort of thing. Maybe, I don't know, but I'm guessing that that was reflective of his desire to know something about himself, and it was given to him to understand. He used to talk about the need for integration by using words like, you got to let that exquisite left brain get into the action here. You can't make sense of any experience until it resonates with you and you think about it always or often after the experience. You can't have such an experience if you think you want the experience. So there's like a paradox there, right? You can't force such an experience. You can have an experience, though. But those experiences mean nothing to the psyche, the self, the soul of you as an individual unless you make sense of it. Like the ability to see those numbers that are repeating 11, 11, 333, whatever it is, like the chance encounter of thinking about somebody that you hadn't seen in 15 years and then turning a corner and there that person is. What are the odds? I think that interconnectedness is the pathway that tells you you're on the right track in terms of your personal growth. Those experiences are little, I don't know, corn kernels, breadcrumbs for you to realize that you are growing, that you are expanding, and that you're learning more about the true nature of self and what I can only call the greater aspect of self, where all things are connected, where consciousness is fundamental. So, if that's true, what I just said, then personal consciousness is just as necessary as expanded universal consciousness in this journey. And consciousness is fundamental. We put out vibrations of what is needed. We put out vibrations of desire, and those vibrations respond. That is a much greater path for exploration and curiosity to me in terms of where I am in my journey, which is a long ass journey. Bob came into the conversation of consciousness, his curiosity about it, much later in life than I did. I wanted to know at age 7. Bob had an out of body experience at, like 55, something like that, his first one. I didn't have an out of body experience. Well, yes, I did, but it was prompted by something very different. And I didn't even know it was an out of body experience at that age, 7, 7, 8, not sure yet. So Sometimes in the journey of 1,000 miles, which begins with a single step, that single step has to be enough of a use the analogy of the drop of water into the stillness of you know of a lake that creates the ripples. Sometimes it has to be a boulder, create big waves. Again, we're back into vibration. In
Yeah.
order for something to change radically, you're zooming out, and the need to have that rough or gruff message may be reflective of the guardian and the superego. It may also be reflective of the aspect of self which is guiding your personal journey, that which I refer to as the intimate, which needed to drop a boulder. I cannot make that determination, but I want you to be curious about that, because being curious about those two potential possibilities, will help you integrate it once it goes. And you'll know not only something about the nature of self as it exists on multiple levels, but also, um, yeah, that's enough. The nature of
Hmm.
self as it exists on multiple levels. We'll leave it at that. Does that make you curious, or did I just confuse you a little bit more?
No, I think somebody told me one time, they said, when you're curious about the universe, it becomes curious about you. And that
Ah,
stuck with me. Yeah, right. I like it.
mhm,
Because you can apply it to anything, yourself, the universe, in anything you want. And I think curiosity is paramount. I think that we're in this world to explore and to be curious. And that there's basically like each human is like a universe to themselves. And like for example, people ask me all the time to help them get out of body or astral project or these kinds of things, and I always ask them why. I always start with why. Why do you want to do this? What are you trying to accomplish? And so
mhm,
many of the things that people are trying to accomplish are actually internal, and people don't realize there's a universe inside of you. And I
mhm,
spend a lot of my time, for lack of better words, astral projecting inside myself, and
mhm,
exploring the universe within, because that's the important part. It's fun, obviously, if you want to go explore the cosmos, if you want to, I had an experience at the Monroe Institute where it was a shared experience with Ignacio, and
mhm,
amazing person. And so I was when we were in meditation, I saw these screens, and so a screen would pop up in front of me, and it would have like a landscape, and I could go into it, kind of like you're switching channels on Netflix, right? And I
mhm,
went into this one, and it was like the most high resolution I've ever seen, and I was like kind of going around, almost like a flying around, exploring, and then I came back out, and I kind of swiped with my hand to the next one. When I went into the next one, and I don't know where this came from because this was nothing I'd ever thought about or explored before, but it was 100% claymation, the whole world. And it was the coolest thing I've ever seen. And I mean, I went into it, right? So I could enter into
mhm.
these screens. I went into the screen. I'm in this complete claymation world, and it was blowing my mind. It was like I was on acid or something. And we're totally sober there. And it was so vivid and so realistic and so amazing. And then so when we went to the debrief, I wasn't even going to say anything because it just sounds silly. But I decided to because we're all friends there and we're sharing. So I shared that. And Ignacio was like, I went there too. Like I went to that same place, and it was very I don't know, validating to know it did two things. Like it confirmed that it wasn't just me imagining this experience, because how would we both imagine the same things? So that place exists in some form of objective way. Now, was it just that we were both on the same vibration or frequency at the same time? Who knows? I mean, you can dissect it a million ways, but it was really really interesting because when we talk about these things, how much of it is a imagination, how much of it is just you know our thoughts, and how much of it is real. When you go to these places, are you going to real places? Like when Bob went to KT95, was KT95 an objective place that like I can go to, or was that just something that his psyche used as like a simulation to get over some sort of an internal fear or doubt, or help you develop and move on, kind of a thing. um, and the more I explore these worlds, I think that there's both. Obviously, I think some of it is internal, manifestations and simulations that we constantly run to figure things out, like dream school. I go to dream school all the time. I mean, I'm conscious in dream school a lot, and it's simulation after simulation. I'm putting myself through test, and it's rigorous, and I wake up sometimes sweating and exhausted from my dreams because I'm training and working in my dreams. It's wild. So that's a place that exists, but even in that place, there's virtual simulations. It seems that we're running in that place. But then it seems like there are these places, that exist objectively out there in whatever dimension, whatever world, whatever reality that we're going to. And it's beyond fascinating. So anyways, I only bring all that up because I think you should always be curious about everything because the average person, I know me before my kind of whatever you want to call my awakening process, I looked at the world as very materialistic and very small in a way. Like this was everything. Obviously Earth is beautiful and there's all sorts of places you can go on Earth, but this was it. We'll never be able to reach the stars. We'll never be able to go. I looked at things that way. And now I look at it like, oh my God, like it's so vast. There's so much. It's so complex and so layered and there's so much we can do. And in that just it's all about curiosity. Curiosity is the intention that kind of drives that exploration. If you're not curious, then you'll never set the intention to go and discover and explore these places. And I just think there's so much out there. So curiosity for things that happen in your own personal life, explore everything. What does this mean? Where does this come from? What's it trying to teach me? All that's very important. And be curious about other people. Be curious about how they're connected to you and what's beyond this physical veil. I mean, just be curious about it all because it's so much fun. you know.
You have to be motivated to be curious.
You do. And
What
it seems like
what
we're
prompts the motivation?
yeah, it seems like I've tossed this around my brain a lot. Like it seems like there's obviously this veil of forgetting when you come into this incarnation, so that we can have focus. You gotta kind of forget all the other things out there, so that we can focus on this life, get the most out of it. I understand that mechanism, and it also seems like there's a process throughout the incarnation in almost everybody that you're supposed to remember. So it's like the forgetting and the remembering are both two important aspects of life. They just have to happen at the right times. And it's fascinating, what like because usually to remember something pretty dramatic has to happen, right? Like to shake you. It's like a snow globe. You kind of shake the snow globe, and you know. So some people remember, you know, I guess more subtly, but it seems like for most people, there's some sort of not necessarily traumatic, but dramatic way to really just kind of shake your snow globe and get you to be like, oh yeah, duh, look, all this cool stuff out there.
Maybe it's a journey for remembering. Maybe it's a journey for forgetting. Maybe it's a journey for learning. Maybe it's a journey for just the nature of experience. Maybe.
Maybe it's
I
all
don't
of it.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe
Mhm.
it is. I was once having a discussion with my higher self, and I was asking questions of its nature, and I said, because I kind of bought into the idea that in order for the one to experience anything, it had to become a multiplicity of things to create a subject object split, right? You can't have any experience without time or space, distance, right? And if quantum nonlinearity is true, then that collapses time and space because time and space don't really exist, right? There's only the now. I mean, all of these discussions taking place. I'm asking this question of my higher self at that time, my understanding of what that was. And I said, so what's the point of it all? I mean, am I trying to learn something of value? Because Bob had implied that that's what this was all about. And I got into my system and I thought about it and I wondered about it. And I'm asking my higher self about it. And the answer was you can't really learn what God already knows. Right? If all information has already happened and time and space are really just illusory or illusions or a simulation for, growth, what are you really learning? What are you bringing back of value? And the only answer I can come up with is for the nature of experience.
Yeah.
Just experience. Well, what the heck is an experience? And what's the value of experience? I sit there at my coffee table in the morning, drinking coffee, coming back from the world of wherever it is I go when I'm asleep and not me, right? And I come back and I'm slowly coming back to this familiar me, and I'm drinking my coffee and my awareness is getting sharper and sharper. I'm having an experience, but it's kind of a dual experience. It also feels mundane. I do it every single day, right? Is there a value in this experience? No. And part of me is just saying, no, just leave me the blank alone. I'm drinking my coffee. Yeah, I don't want to talk. I'm just trying to bring myself back into this body, and somewhere along the line that works. But if for some reason, through curiosity, I decide to open myself up to the experience of reintegrating my awareness into my body as I'm drinking my coffee, something enlivens the experience. It all of a sudden has meaning for me, like what Jung called synchronicity is meaningful coincidences. Now all of a sudden the experience of my everyday mundane experience of going from groggy state into an awakened state through drinking a stimulant is every cell in my body is becoming aware, and I am no longer floating in the void of non existence. I am becoming aware and drawing awareness into my existence in that precious moment, which appears to be mundane, but is elevated and transformed in that moment through my will and desire to enliven the experience. That's saying, it's curious. Why would I want to do that? Right? What part of me wants to take the mundane and make it into something sublime? Why is that part of the story of consciousness in general? I don't think it's exclusive to me. People go to church on Sunday. They're doing the same thing. They're taking a mundane weekly experience and making it a sublime event in their lives for 1 hour of the week. People who meditate, people who devote themselves to exploring consciousness in the way that we're discussing, make everything a sublime experience. Every moment is a meditation, becoming even more interesting, in my opinion, when you realize that somehow my consciousness is interacting with a field. We tend to think of fields as an energy force or matrix or whatever. It literally is the air around us. It's literally the gravitational field surrounding us. It's the field that holds our atomic energy at the molecular level of our physical bodies together. It's all of that, and it's all conscious. It's all consciousness. When you interact with the field in that way, that's, in my opinion, and I'm not absolutely certain about this because I can't make it happen immediately, you know, the field interacts with you. As you said, when you look at the universe is looking back. Nietzsche said, when you look into the void will stare back. Either way, it's all relevant as a reflection of something. What's the looking back part? It's a reflection, it's a response. Light traveling. I don't know, we could talk about it's theoretical. Everything we're talking about here is theoretical until it is experienced by an explorer.
Yep. But it's endless fascinating, and like, that's all part of it. You're supposed to question everything. You're supposed to be curious about everything, and it's not with the intention to solve it. or to have all the answers. It's just, how could you not look at this world? How could you not look at reality and not want to know more and not want to push and to prod and to experiment and okay, when I do this, this happens. And how could you not want to just be immersed in all of this? It's fun,
You're alive in the world. How many
Yeah.
people don't even consider what it is we're talking about?
So it goes back to, so you had mentioned, there's a whole deterministic versus free will sort of argument. And where I come down on this is I think that we have about 95% deterministic, right? Like meaning like, our subconscious programming basically runs through this game of life. And it's a good thing because without it, we'd have to sit there and remind ourselves to breathe and to wink and to, take steps and all this kind of stuff. So much runs on a subconscious programming, and that's good. But there's this little 5% wiggle room, it seems, that when we can apply our intention, we can, like what Tom Campbell would say, basically you're taking that probability distribution field and applying intention to one of those probabilistic paths. But we have about this 5% wiggle room where we get to make conscious decisions and override the subconscious programming and take control of our life. And I think that's a beautiful balance. I think that you need to have 95% because that's what makes this world run smoothly. I mean, we have 100,000 thoughts a day. If we acted on every one of them, if we had instant manifestation, it would be chaos, utter chaos. So it's good that we have these filters. It's good that most of our thoughts don't manifest. It's good that we only have 5% conscious ability because I think that that's what allows us to brainstorm and to daydream and to get lost in thought and not destroy everything around us. It allows us to explore these things, right? But most people, it seems, operate on like a 99% or 100% subconscious programming. Most people don't even exercise that 5% of conscious free will. And I think that one of the things we're here to do is to exercise that 5% free will, to become more, free and independent and to be able to explore and be curious and do these things. And I understand why most people don't, because I was one of them. But I do think that is an important thing to not do all the time, but to do some of the time, is to exercise free will, make conscious decisions, knowing that you're not going to destroy the whole matrix, you're not going to ruin the world because 95% of it's always going to run autonomously on the subconscious, programming, which is good. But exercise the 5%, that little wiggle room as much as you can. And, be as curious as possible because you're not going to break anything. You're not going to ruin the experiment, but,
Just the
probably not.
nature of self. You're
Yeah.
gonna you're gonna break old patterns.
Yes. But
You
sometimes
are
that's
gonna
good.
go through. I'm not here to determine that.
Yeah.
I am
Yeah.
here to tell you that that is the result, the inevitable result. You may become more psychic than you ever really wanted to be. You may become more empathic than you ever really wanted to be. You may have a greater understanding that the choices that you make do have a ripple effect on the lives of others, and you may be more conscious about how you treat others. A lot of really good things can happen, but it requires that, you change the things that no longer serve that purpose. I'm curious about what it is that's within the story of consciousness as a collective that prompts us to want that. It's exemplified in every known religious expression there is. It's exemplified by some god man or some transcendent figure who comes from the heavens and delivers an ultimate message and flies back, and that message is love and patience and fortitude, and that somehow we are in control of the matrix, that we are actually able to do things within it. In the Kabbalah, they speak about this as this universe, the physical universe, as the world of action, where density, that vibrational density, is slower. So things take time. Why? Because time moves fairly slowly. I'm probably at 62, 63. I'm probably accelerating it a bit.
Is that coffee kicking in?
That's it, I mean, that's time. And it's necessary because waves cannot move unless there's time, because waves move over time, and
Hmm.
they cannot move without space. They need space. So it's all vibration. And what is vibration? It's a form of energy. Everything in the mundane world is that. And I believe, as Ed Mitchell believed, as many other people believe, that it's all conscious. Information is waves. Light is kind of unique in that it's particle and wave. I don't understand enough about physics to really speak intelligently for a long time about how light and dimensions are interrelated, but maybe one day those folks at CERN will help us understand a little bit more about that. But the Kabbalistic model is that in the world of Yetzirah, Hebrew word for formation, which has more to do with what people would refer to as the astral plane, which includes thought, Focus 25, place where belief systems live, perhaps the subconscious. All of these form constructs and hold in packets of information, what the quantum theorists refer to as silver space, which inform our consciousness as we journey through the world of Asya, the world of action. The dimension of Yetzirah, this place of formation, is a lot faster. Time is very different in Yetzirah than it is in Asya. Not really sidereal, but might be able to equate it to that. An overlapping dimension or universe, as the Kabbalists talked about it, to that higher dimension is called Bria. It's a creative place. It is enveloped and inhabited, they say, by archangels. Now, we tend to think of angels as, little pooties with wings, little cherub faces and, all pointing upwards and stuff like that. It's depicted in Renaissance art. But the Kabbalah doesn't see angels in that way at all. Kabbalists see angels as being laser-like coherent light forces of intelligent energy that is focused on one task.
Hmm.
That's a very coherent and powerful form of consciousness.
Yeah.
Okay. Archetypes that don't really have personalities so much, just one job. And they don't deviate from that job. All right. If you think about an angelic form of consciousness and think about how narrow the experience of, I mean, I assume there's some form of free will that exists within that consciousness. It then chooses to embody it, but that's it. It's not like it can leave its job.
Hmm.
What would the experience of time and space mean to such a being, such a form of consciousness? It it's almost, it doesn't exist. There's no experience to be had. It doesn't have an ego. It doesn't really have a free will. It's not there to do anything other than its job. And its job is to inform that which is occurring in the world of Yitzhak, the world of formation. So in Tom's model of the video game controller controlling everything in the Matrix, that kind of makes sense from the Kabbalistic perspective, in that there are these archetypes which can be connected with or influencing our own being through our thoughts, which are the basis of all form in the world of formation, and then distilled down vibrationally into a density for the world of action. That's called, in Kabbalah, that's called involution. And it takes place across the entire tree of life, which, we'd have to talk for hours and hours and hours about that. It's not worth it. But the idea is that everything is divine and everything is expressed for the purpose of moving divinity, which includes the duality of good and evil as it's
Yeah.
perceived. For what purpose other than experience, I can't figure out. But maybe there is another purpose and my brain just can't go there. I
Well, here's a
can't.
thought. Did you know William Bullman?
I never met the man, but I know
Okay.
of his work. Yeah.
Have you read his book, Journeys of the Afterlife? Or
No,
okay.
I've not. No.
So, very interesting thing that just came to mind. What he discovered in that is that this is just gonna distill it down to its simplest form. Is that in this world we live in here in the physical world, we have these buffers between thought and manifestation, right? We don't have instant manifestation. That out in the greater universe, for lack of better words, it's just metaphorically out in the greater universe, as a pure consciousness, you do have things do operate at the speed of thought. You do have the ability to create and to manifest instantly,
Mm-hmm.
and that is a very powerful ability that people in that realm, understand it needs to be taken seriously, and that you're not basically allowed into the realm until you have gone through the training of the physical world. The physical world teaches us patience, humility, teaches us how to parse our thoughts and how to focus and mindfulness and these things that we learn through this journey, and that through that you're actually honing the skill of manifestation, of controlling your thoughts, and that's why we have these filters and buffers and these delays in this world. That's why we don't have instant manifestation. Like I think it was Einstein that said, synchronicity is the universe's way of maintaining anonymity. That these synchronicities are what gives us these little nudges and hints that we're on the right path, but it also makes it to where it won't just come right out and tell you you have the ability as a conscious creator to create your reality. It's implied. We can figure this out and discover it, but it's not told to us. And that's always hidden behind this delay, this buffer. But it's done this way because this is a condensed learning environment for us to learn these abilities and mature at a spiritual consciousness and a creativity level before we're allowed into the greater universe where these abilities can be used. Think about somebody out in that world, that realm that has instant manifestation capabilities, but they don't have the conscious maturity to use it in constructive ways. They could cause all sorts of mayhem. And that there's this, what he talks about in that book is that there is this barrier between this world and that world, and it is very enforced to keep us here until we have shown that we are capable to exist on that other side. So to answer your question of what's the purpose of all this, this is just theoretical. I'm not saying that this is the case, but it's a theoretical purpose that we're here to train and to get to that level of purity to where we can be trusted with those immense abilities that exist in that part of the conscious spectrum.
Might be true. I have a different experience.
Yeah.
I create things all the time. I do.
Yeah.
I'm a musician. I'm a composer. I shouldn't even say that I really create them. They're created for me and implanted in my mind. And if I don't activate my own ability and willpower to manifest that creation in the world of action, you'll never hear it. You'll never hear my creation.
Yeah.
Meaning, I wake up in the morning while I'm drinking that coffee, contemplating my connection to everything. I'll hear a groove. Now my vibration is moving to that. I'm waking up, right? Coffee's kicking in, so to speak. Now all of a sudden I'll hear a bass line that goes with that groove. Now I'm hearing a guitar. All right, I'm sitting there vibing to this, right? Drinking my coffee, waking up, contemplating the meaning of life. This is all going on in my head. Where that comes from, I have no idea. I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't trying to create anything. It just popped into my head. It's self-emerging, what mystics called ex nihilo, out of nothing, like those thoughts that we were talking about. So I play with this. I hear it in my head. Now I got to go make some eggs and take the dog out and do all the mundane things I do. I forgot all about this song, right? That song still lives somewhere. How do I know that? Because I don't have an eidetic memory and I didn't notate it, right? I didn't whip out and I didn't hum it into my phone so that I remember it. 3, 4 days later, I'll hear that exact pattern coming into my head with a vocal hook. Now I'm singing a chorus over that. It's more formulated. It grew like a
Yeah.
chia pet without anybody watering it. It just grew some hair. And now I've got vocal harmonies going on. And I've got lyrics starting to emerge. All of this just comes. I'll get a phrase and I may write down the phrase. 2 weeks later, I'll forget all about the song, right? 2 weeks later, it'll be almost fully fleshed out. I hear a different chord sequence for the verses, and it has the chorus, which had already been kind of established in my head from the previous writing session, as if I'm really doing anything, right? And it'll have a middle eight, a bridge, to use the American term, 8 bars, where it kind of
Mhm.
breaks up the monotony of the song, gives it a new direction. If I let that gestate within my consciousness and really don't pay much mind to it, a year later, it will come fully formed into my head and I'll almost know exactly what the song's about. So I have to put a little bit of effort into it now, right, to actualize it in the world. And I start asking the deliverer of this music, what's the song about? And, I'm writing lyrics now. And the lyrics usually take, I don't know, an hour. It's kind of flows out. 18 months later, that song is still there. It's fully formed. I hear it very clearly in my head. I know exactly what it sounds like. I've heard it 100 times. You can't hear it until I sit down in my recording studio and replicate, and I mean that sincerely. I want to underline, italicize, and bold that word. Replicate what I hear in my head. I'm not working it out. There's no problem solving going on here. I
Yeah.
just know what the guitar sounds like. Okay, now I play the guitar. I know what the drums sound like. And I go over to my drum kit and I play that. And all of this just comes out. And the whole process takes effort and striving and skill and time. Now, when I push play, my buddy Jordan can hear my creation. Prior to that, it was still a creation. It just lived in what I call my head.
Yeah.
But it kept on growing of its own accord in a way that the same way that the programs that I make, I know what I'm doing, but it's not a conscious process. My process is to be conscious, put a little effort into it, and then let it go. And it comes back, and it comes back greater. What is that? What is that? Where does that stuff come from? I'm not the only artist who does this.
Oh, it's most creatives like, and it's even been
Sometimes.
shown through like patent records that there's people that have written the same book, wrote the same song, patent the same products, multiple people without any contact with each other around the world. So that information that was coming to you, there's a good chance it was going to other people too. And it's just the first person to take action and put it into form gets the
Yes.
credit.
Right. And what's the motivation for taking action? Could be many, many, many different motivations, right? For me, it's the experience of creating it.
Yeah. But where did that
Because,
information come from? That's so fascinating. And it seems like in some ways it's just blanketed to Earth, you know, for waiting for one of our antennas, law of averages, somebody's going to pick it up and someone's going to do something with it. This happens, like I said, with books, with inventions,
mhm,
with all sorts of art. And it's endlessly fascinating because it makes it realize, okay, so say two people wrote the same book at the same time. This has happened many times, right? Same characters,
right,
same setting, same name of the book, with no
right,
contact with the other person.
right.
Are those two people bonded in some way? Like, is that information coming from like kind of an oversoul type of thing down to all the bonded people on Earth, not caring who takes it and runs with it because they're all part of the same, right? And I understand ultimately we're all part of the same, but you know what I mean? There are still little
Yeah, they're
little
bonded right
packets.
up
Yeah.
until the point in time where they're in court suing each other over copyright infringement. Then they're no longer bonded. Um,
Very true. But you see what I'm saying? So that information,
yes,
is
I
it
know
available
exactly.
to everyone or is it available to specific people? It's so fascinating.
No, it's available to anyone, but the skill set and the propensity towards a particular skill set, I think, is in some ways necessary. For instance, information like that might come to you and 20 other people in one writer, but only one person has an ego ident that I'm a writer and here's an idea and I have to manifest it. What
Absolutely.
what motivates the manifestation is anybody's guess. It could be ego identification, the potential for financial gain. It doesn't really matter. For me, now, it really has to be about the experience of it because the music business is no longer, I don't know, who buys music anymore? Nobody buys music. And the type of music I write is, I don't know, not accessible to the top 40 charts today. So has a limited audience. I don't bother recording music unless I feel like, this one just needs to be birthed. And I know I'll be the only one to listen to it, so I'm not looking for an ego stroke, right? And it's interesting because I don't even, I don't really need to put in that effort because I know exactly what it sounds like, and it really doesn't matter if you never hear it because you're not going to like it anyway. Or
But
maybe
it's
you
still,
will like it, and who cares because you're not going to buy it. I don't know
but
what the
bringing it
motive.
to life is fun. You're bringing it to life,
Exactly,
you know?
exactly. With the
Like
Try
I
It
can
Mind
explain to
program,
you, yeah, what eating chocolate's like, but until you eat chocolate, you know what I
right?
mean? Like I can tell you what it's like to me, but then when you eat, you're like, holy cow, this stuff's awesome. You're listening to that music in your head, but once you put it out there and you can feel the vibration, through the speakers and you know what I mean? It's like it's a totally different experience. So if the whole point of consciousness is experience, qualia,
I
then you
think
have to have
so.
this physical realm to bring these things to life because we can experience things differently here than we can anywhere else. Wherever that information came from, the reason they want it in the physical world is because this is a different experience. It's just a
Hmm.
completely different experience. It doesn't mean it's better or worse, anything else. It's just a different experience. We experience it differently here. I mean, music, like I said, with the Beatles song when you were a kid, music hits people different. I can pick up a guitar now. I play guitar. I can pick up a guitar. I can play perfectly songs I learned 35 years ago, without missing a beat. Where? How, I couldn't tell you anything else that I learned 35 years ago. Are you kidding me? But I can play music perfectly. It's music is different. Sound is different. Like you said, everything's vibration, and I just think that it is experience. That is what we're here for, and that the things that we do here in this physical reality, I don't think you can do in other realities. Of course, there's other realities, and they have their specialties, and they have things that make them great. But I think this physical reality, that is what it's about: is taking that information, taking action, and expressing it, bringing it to life. And you'll take that information, you'll make a song. Somebody else could get that information and make a song. And those two songs using the same information will probably be different. They'll have a different energy to them. They'll have a different personality to them. So you can have
Sure.
100 people make the same song, and you'll have 100 different, iterations and variations and flavors of it. And I think that's what makes it amazing because it's going through your filter. Mark made that song.
Hmm.
Doesn't matter where the information came from. You made it. So now that's your
Exactly.
song. Yeah.
Exactly. And somebody's interpretation of that and how it affects them is also part of that mystery. I have developed a program called the Triad Mind program, right? And it's developed for 3 stages of understanding through exploration of altered states. To access those 3 levels of content, I want to call it content, of the construct of mind, being conscious, subconscious, superconscious. People listen to these recordings and they have very different experiences. Okay. Everybody, as you know, when you go to the Monroe Institute, we'll all be listening to the same instructions on the recording, right? Bob talking, whoever's happened to narrate the experience. But then they take a left and, they all have different experiences, or in the case of you and Ignacio, similar experiences, connectivity experiences. Taking somebody into an experience with intention is what you do when you write a book. You're narrating an experience that is going to give you an outcome. Same thing applies with music. I'm not music, but video. When you're telling a story in a movie,
Mhm.
these types of recordings that I've created for my entire life have an intention too. But I learned a long time ago to let go of that intention. I was at a professional division conference that they hold every year at the Monroe Institute, back in the day anyway. And what the professional division is are a bunch of MDs and PhDs and various fields, some of which are consciousness studies, but all of which seem to wanted to apply hemisync technology to their particular field. Psychologists, for obvious reasons, right? And I remember working with a fellow by the name of John Epperson, who and Barbara Bullard. Shout out to both of you if you happen to be listening. They wanted to make a recording that would help people with ADHD, and the music was constructed with a certain rhythmic pattern that would help entrain people who suffer with ADHD. And the theory at the time, with regards to the brainwave consciousness correlates, for lack of a better word, was that people who suffered with ADHD, actually, you would think you'd want to give them slower brain waves because of the hyperactivity involved
Mhm.
in the syndrome. But the theory at the time was, no, what you want to do is feed that, give them a sympathy, so very fast binaural beats that would help entrain, and the music itself had an ostinato pattern that went ba 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 ba. Okay, so it's kind of
Yeah.
fast tempo broken down to eighths.
You kind of have to match their beat, right? Their internal beat.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Sympathetic resonance was the
Yeah.
idea.
Absolutely.
But an interesting thing happened on the way to creating this intentional piece of music. Right? During the professional division, all of these people were getting up and reporting what they were doing with their clinical research while using this piece of music. Some of which were working with vigilance tasking, some of which were working with ADHD, some of which were working with people who suffer with ADHD. I remember one psychologist was using this piece of music to help people who suffered from sadistic ritual abuse and reducing their resistance patterns to the defense entities that came up, personality structures, so that she could get deeper into what happened. And it went on and on. It's like every presenter was saying, and we worked with Remembrance to do this. It's the name of the piece of music, Remembrance.
Okay.
So finally, during the question and answer period, after about 6 or 7 presenters, because I was sitting there recording the entire workshop, right, the seminar, each speaker. Somebody got up during the Q&A and said, because we had question and answers of the keynote speakers, the person got up and said, I have a question, but it's not for you, it's for Mark. What did you put in this recording that gave it such a multifaceted application? And I was sitting there the whole time thinking the exact same thing. What is it about this recording that's got, because it's not mind awake, body asleep. It's not
Yeah.
expanded awareness. It's ADHD application with a bunch of frequencies that I never used for anything else. Very specific to that task, right?
Yeah.
And I was really glad they asked the question, but I certainly didn't have an answer.
Huh.
And I think I said something to the effect of, I was just thinking the same thing. And really, the secret here is that I have this magic chicken foot that I got in New Orleans. And after I finish every master, I shake the chicken foot over the master recording and say, "Thy will be done." Because I don't know. I don't know why people have different experiences or different applications based on something that should be a very predictable science.
Do you think maybe those different variations of emotions and behaviors that this was resonating with are also just vibrating at the same frequency? That they share something in common with you created it with an intention to help with ADHD. Does ADHD, if you want to break it down in these terms, vibrate at the same frequency or intensity that these other things do as well? Therefore, it also resonated with those two?
No, I think it has more to do with the intention of the therapist.
Uh, Almost like a placebo effect.
I don't know what a placebo effect is. I don't even like that word.
But you know what I mean? Like if they're
It
if they're
implies that
applying,
something's not real, that there's no actual pathology to this that can make sense. And
I
so
think
we
it
put it in
implies that
file 86.
our
I don't
thoughts
even
have more power than we give them credit for. That if you think something might happen, there's a better chance that it will.
intention, attention, and expectation of outcome.
Mm.
Yeah. My intention and attention was focused on creating something that would serve people who are in need, right? Did a lot of research on it. All the people that were involved in the project put a lot of research into it. We're very focused, strong intention. We're going to do this. We're going to make it happen. My attention and John Epperson's attention was to the details, how to make it happen so that it had a precision, right? Then we put it out into the world. And I don't know how many people with ADHD were actually helped by this, but all I know is that all of these therapists, for some unknown reason, why would they even, grab that recording to use? Maybe something about the music drew them to it. I don't know. I don't know is the
Does it
answer.
still exist out there?
Oh
Can
yeah,
people
the
find
name
that?
of the recording is called Remembrance, and
Remembrance.
what it will do to you, I cannot tell you.
Well, I'm
All
interested
I
now.
Yeah, yeah, and you should be. And the same applies for probably every recording that I ever made at Monroe Institute and with Triad Mind. I have a strong intention to serve. That magic chicken foot was a metaphor, but the
Mm.
words "Thy will be done" is very intentional, especially now since that experience, because now I know it doesn't matter what my intention is. I can come up with these concepts and apply all of the knowledge that I've amassed about the brainwave consciousness correlates and the expectation of outcome, all right, based on previous experience, but it's not going to be fulfilled 100%, especially if you and I aren't working together in the course of a program. If you do the Triad Mind program at home, you may or may not, you have the option to make contact with me, right? When I do an observance for all the Triad Mind participants, the level 3 or stage 1 participants, we're in a Zoom room and I'm interacting with you and I get to know who you are and I get to get that information, not only the information you're presenting, but the information that you're not even sure you're really presenting, don't know why you're presenting. In the programs, when we're doing them on Zoom, people will tell me their experience, and almost invariably, they're grasping to try to find words for the experience and to put it into words to convey to me because they're looking for me to give them an answer as to what the experience was about. And they'll hear themselves talking in the group setting. And I'm sure you've had the same experience at Monroe. People will talk about such experiences and then go, if that makes any sense. That's their tagline.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I just made any sense to you. Of course, you made sense to me, but it wasn't the words you said. All right. The words you said were part of the information I received. I extract other bits.
Hmm.
I am in touch with my intimate, who's in touch with their intimate. And the unspoken language is what I'm picking up. And it doesn't have there's no lexicon for it.
Yeah.
It's a bit like remote viewing in that respect. And I don't want to call myself a remote viewer because I'm not, you know.
But we're all
But
transmitting and receiving data constantly. Yeah, just,
exactly.
yeah,
What is that
unconsciously.
data, though? It's vibration. That's all it is. It's
Yeah.
not vocal data. It's not a lexicon. It's a language that goes,
Yeah.
and I don't have words for it. But one can learn to expand consciousness through exploring consciousness and have that same experience of data flow. One can learn to be discerning between what is personal and what is impersonal consciousness. All of that's possible through exploring consciousness, whether you do it at the Monroe Institute or do it through Triad Mind. The thing is it's not going to end up being as intended by the individual who created it. You understand what I'm saying when I say
Yeah.
that? So my intention is not and attention does not provide me the expectation of an absolute outcome, but there's an expectation of outcome.
Hmm.
Something will happen. My job as a facilitator is to put all of my energy and effort into that creation, pay attention to the person that I'm working with, expect an outcome, but let go of what I think that outcome should be. Right?
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense.
The same thing applies for life.
Hmm.
So, with regards to manifestation and discriminator circuits and all of that stuff, we're not ready. There may be truth in that, but I tend to think there's a larger system consciousness system that actually has an agenda that is not necessarily defined beyond experience. And that's why when we reach a certain understanding of self or consciousness or anything else that's evolving, it has intelligence and says, "Oh, good for you." And there's
Yep.
nothing but a void there.
Got to keep the whole
Now,
game going.
right,
You can't have an
exactly.
end. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
And
who
it's
says there
for,
has to be an end to any of this? I mean, it might be an eternal process. I
no,
mean,
it's like the expansion of the universe.
yeah.
Right? Big
Yeah.
Bang. I mean, this is what we think we know about it. I mean, Big Bang, whether you subscribe to M theory as the source of the Big Bang or just, the God saying, let there be light, or whatever it is that your belief about the beginning of creation, time, and space, that bang occurs. We know it occurred because we can see the red shift, right? It's observable. And we know that the universe is expanding. And once upon a time, theoretical physicists or astrophysicists decided that somewhere along the line it was going to collapse back in on itself, but it doesn't seem to be doing that. It just keeps on
Yeah.
expanding and expanding and expanding. My question is, what the hell is it expanding into? If time and space are interrelated, kissing cousins, so to speak, and all of matter and all of that, time, space, matter, are expanding, what's it expanding into? If I was to blow up a balloon right here,
Yeah.
right, and the balloon expands, it's expanding into the space around it. Is there some space outside of time and space that we need to be paying attention to?
Yeah.
Do you
Hell,
understand where I'm
yeah,
going
oh
with that?
yeah, yeah. And I even have
Is
my
it
theories on all of that, I mean, I think obviously the dark matter that is expanding, that's filling the space that we can't see. If I had to guess, it's information because all the experience that we have is data that has to be stored somewhere. And the dark energy part would just be like Landau's principle. Landau's principle basically suggests that or like I guess you could say John Archibald Wheeler with it from bit. Whenever you talk about it being the physical universe, all came from bits of information. Well, anytime you add information or delete information, it creates energy. Equals MC squared shows that energy is convertible to mass. So the dark matter that we can't see, but we know it's there because of its gravitational effects and stuff. It's there and it's expanding and everything's expanding. Well, why would it be expanding? Well, because of all of the experiences and all the thoughts and all the things that happen throughout the physical universe, that is information. It puts out information that has to be stored somewhere. So the storage of that information would be the dark matter. The dark energy would be the residue from the formation of that dark matter. It creates, whether you're adding it or deleting it, it's going to create some sort of an energy. And that's expanding our physical universe. It's expanding because of our experiences, which turns into data. That's my theory, anyways. And
well
where
the
it's
dark
expanding to,
matter, yeah, finish. Where's
I
it
was just gonna say
expanding to?
where it's
Or
expanding
what
to, I
is it
don't know.
expanding?
But
Right.
what a lot of people theorize is that it expands and it contracts. Well, that would make sense if you're adding, so there's 8 billion of us, 8 billion experiences just on this one physical planet. That's a lot of information. That's a lot of experience, right? So we're expanding. We're like blowing the balloon up, okay? With all of our experience that's stored as data, dark energy that expands the universe. Well, what if the cyclical nature of events, the humans cease to exist in physical form, and therefore that information ceases to be created. And then at some point, the Akashic record, the database, doesn't need to exist anymore, and it's deleted. Once you delete that information, it would contract back down. It would stop expanding. That's just a theoretical idea of how it can
Not a
expand and
bad one.
contract. Yeah, so it doesn't have to necessarily contract and keep going because at some point it will probably come back down and it just goes, it's like breathing in and out. You're breathing in and out, but it's information that is making it expand and contract. And that's where
Bit
the big,
anthrocentric though, isn't it?
well, no, because it doesn't have to do necessarily with just Earth, because I think there's probably other, like Robert Temple would probably agree, there's probably a few other physical places. I mean, even Robert Monroe talked about with the Explorer team going to other physical locations around Earth and finding other physical locations. So it's not just humans on Earth. That's just what we see, but I'm sure there's other Earth type places around the universe that are having experiences and pumping their data out into the universe. So that seems pretty logical.
Ed Mitchell once referred to dark matter's potential.
Hmm.
It's not really information so much as potential.
I think that so dark matter comprises about 25% of the universe. I think the other 75% is potential. I think it is unrealized potential plasma energy, and the 25% of dark matter is actually the realized matter. It's the information storage, in my opinion. So there's 75% that has not been realized, that has not been molded into physical matter reality, and that's we just don't see it. So, anyways, that's how I would look at it. So he's not wrong or anything. Obviously, I'm not going to ever say Edgar Mitchell's wrong. But if you
None
look
of
at
us
like,
are wrong.
no,
We just
exactly.
don't know, right?
But if you look at the universe as 75% unrealized matter and 25% realized matter, then what he would be looking at is that 75% of unrealized potential energy, which
Yeah.
comprises most of the universe. So we have a long way to go. We haven't reached our storage limit yet. We have 75% remaining. So we have a long way to go. So we don't have to worry about getting deleted or anything yet, but it seems like maybe there is an upper limit to this universe. And that once we reach it, wipe the hard drive clean, everything shrinks back down, start again. Yeah, again, there's no way to ever know. That's just how my brain computes this stuff.
Or it expands into its threshold limit and bangs up against a membrane to create another universe.
Oh, I'm sure that's what Ishtok Bentov would say, is that this is just one of many, and
M
that
theory is just, is of that ilk. I have no idea. What I do know is that that problem is bigger than my brain can handle. How I integrate that information and make sense of it is that I think about consciousness in the same way.
Yep,
Potential.
potential.
And it also has bodies, packets of information, qualia, that is personal. And some of it is very impersonal. It exists whether there's a person there to experience it or not. It's not created by anything, it's just potential. That field is extraordinary when I apply it to my thinking of how I interact with consciousness as I understand it personally and as I understand it impersonally. I may not be able to manifest an apple out of thin air, but I can visualize an apple really well. And apples show up. It just didn't happen in that moment
Hmm.
in my hand. That may be part of the discriminator circuit that we're talking about, or Bill Billman was talking about, and other, mystics have talked about this forever. It may also be a necessary function of time, so that I don't know, it's conjecture here, so that we learn that striving has a value because it creates experience. Not always happy experiences. Sometimes I'll be creating something. I'm so tired. Why am
Patience
I
is a virtue, right?
right? But she doesn't always wait, right?
No.
She's there, and she is a virtue. Anyway, we could talk about that for about 6 weeks. I think we've held this conversation and tried to hold your audience for a good long time. It's 5:21. We've been at it for about 4 hours.
Wow. All
What
right.
do you want? What do you want to cover before we say goodbye? Because we could pick this up at
Well,
another time.
I would love to pick your brain at another future time. I think we just scratched the surface. You're so generous, and I appreciate you doing this because, yeah, we've been talking for a while, and this is amazing. So much great information in here. I want everyone listening to know how to find you and how to learn more about the triad mind because it sounds fascinating. I know I'm going to dive into it. So, what is the best way for people to find you and to learn more about
You can always contact me through the website, which is thetriadmind.com. You got to use your W's
that?
if you want to
Perfect.
get there. All right.
And I love how
Uh,
you seem to bridge all of the, the science and the analytics and the philosophy and everything you've learned with the Monroe Institute and being with Robert Monroe and everything you've done after that. And you seem to sort of bridge and bring together all these elements that are super important, and be able to tackle this complex life and the complex subject of consciousness and self-actualization and realization from a multifaceted perspective. I think that's very important. So you're the perfect person to do what you're doing, and I look forward to introducing your work to my audience because I think they can get great value from it. So
well, thank you.
I'll leave all this
Thank you.
information in the show notes.
Thank you for for the beautiful endorsement. I really do consider myself a tour guide. Out of all the things that, people say, well, you're quite a philosopher. No, I'm not. I'm a tour guide. You're a consciousness researcher. No, I'm not. I'm a tour guide. I've
I
always
love that.
been a tour guide. I mean that sincerely. My job is to take you on a tour, point out places of interest on this tour that you've never seen before, and provide what is known about this in the simplest of form as I can create. Because a lot of times, you whip out a word like consciousness and it has three syllables and nobody knows what you're talking about. That doesn't make the person who's receiving that ignorant. It means that, as I said before, the people who've been studying consciousness for 40 years still don't know what we're talking about. That's okay. Asking the question is what's important. The curiosity, as we've pointed out time and again during this conversation, is important. The desire to know, the motivation to do the practice is what's important. The
Mhm.
analytical part of it, the understanding, the integration is also important, but that comes over time. And that's why when we work together in stage one, we work for 6 months. We don't work for 6 days. I don't want to blow a hole open in somebody's field and leave them floating in a void of nothingness where their psyche is disrupted. No,
Mhm.
very slow and methodical steps in exploring the hypnagogic state. Once you get to that plateau, the tour begins. Taking the information that one gets out of that tour and documenting it like an explorer with curiosity, with objectivity, is what's going to help with the integration. Tour guides take tourists on tours, right? Nothing wrong with tourism. You can go and see the sights, be entertained, eat in all the tourist trap restaurants, and come home and said, I had a wonderful time. Here are the pictures to prove it. But it's not going to be part of you. Travelers tend to get off the beaten path a little bit and go to where the locals might eat and have a different experience. But because they're more seasoned, they're willing to go and do that. Maybe they
More
speak the
adventurous.
language, right? And they speak the language a little bit, and they might think they are part of the culture, but they're really not. They're going to have their experiences and go back home, show pictures. Explorers go into places completely unknown with the intention of gathering as much information as they possibly can about what they're exploring. Ed Mitchell and I talked about this a good deal when I had the pleasure of knowing him. And he had written the book, The Way of the Explorer, and he went and explored the moon.
Yeah.
You don't go there empty handed, right? With complete ignorance. You have to know something about what you're doing. When you arrive, though, you can't make any assumptions about what you're doing. You're there to gather up data. You're there to have the experience, and you will have an experience. Collect the data as objectively as you can and with absolute curiosity. Ooh, that rock looks like it might be important. that dust might be important, if you're on the moon. Oh, that crater's got some interesting crystals in it. I'll check that out too. And bring it back home. When you come back home, you're not coming home with pictures. You're not coming home with just the experience and a full belly and, had the need to lose another 5 pounds because you overate. You're coming home with information that can be analyzed and processed in a way that will change the way you look at exploration. When you develop that mindset on the tour that I take people on, not only do you reap greater benefits, you bring more benefits to humanity because you're adding something to the collective knowledge that you may or may not be able to fully express with words. A lot of teachers have a lot of words. I don't want to be a teacher. I'm happy being a tour guide. Maybe that'll make a lot of better teachers after I'm gone, which is perfectly fine with me because
I
it
love it.
adds something to the collective. So if you're drawn to the program, whoever's out there listening, try to come in with an explorer's mindset. If you just want to be a tourist, you'll have a nice experience, but it's not going to make quite the change that you're hoping for. So understand what your motivation is.
I love that.
That's
That
my
was beautifully
parting
said.
statement.
Yeah, that was perfect. And I mean, it really does go to show that like you can take the same course and have different outcomes, and a lot of it has to do with your own mindset of going into it. Like what are you looking to achieve? How are you going to interact once you're in the course? Because the course can only, like you said, you're just a tour guide. You can't force any of this stuff. You're just guiding. So that was a beautiful way to put it. And that doesn't mean like no matter who you are and what mindset you're in, you're still going to benefit from it. But you're in control of how much, like what type of transformation are you really looking to have,
And application.
an application. Absolutely.
Application. Because we are moving towards a new evolution in consciousness. It's a slow evolution, but we are moving there.
Slow.
I'm just
Yeah.
happy to be part of the conversation.
I think it was slow for a long time, and it seems like we're about to hit a tipping point where things might pick up pace a bit, is the intuition that I'm getting.
It's
So,
all dependent on us.
but we need tour guys like you to guide us through this wild, minefield here. So I'm grateful to know you much better now, and I look forward to learning way more from you and having you guide us through this theme park of consciousness that we're in here. So
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to get to know you too, Jordan, and thanks for the opportunity for the conversation.
absolutely. Thank you, Mark. This was amazing. And thank you guys for listening. Hope everyone has a beautiful day, and I'll see y'all next week. Bye, everyone.